Hello,
G'day, Paul. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you? How you been?
Very good, thank you. Welcome to a cold and windless Melbourne day.
Right. Well, we could do a bit of that here. It's just been it's hot every day, as you can imagine. But today's been raining all day.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Unusual.
No,
So
it's the sort of day here you'd think, yes, comfortable for casting, but yeah, the wind is not there at all. But anyway, that's fine. So outside of not being able to have a cast, having a chat with you is a damn good alternative.
well, we haven't done it for quite a long time, have we? When was
Oh,
the last
oh,
time?
that's right. Yes, yes. You well?
I am good. I am good. So yeah,
Excellent.
are you competing much at the moment? Is there much competition down there?
There's a few, but I haven't competed uh, for over 12 months. I'm doing a lot of training for next year. For hope, I would like to go to Sweden. We'll see what the world brings, but yes, I'm doing a lot of training at the moment, as distinct from competition. I tend to think that training should be in two major blocks and then sub blocks under that, technique training and competition training. So next year, hopefully when I have a better technique, I'll start the competition stuff. That's particularly important for both distance and accuracy because
So
it's
what?
the advantage, mate. You need to train as you play.
Yeah. So what are
So,
you working on?
sorry.
What are you working on specifically?
Well, I mean, there's two things at the moment. The first thing is my thesis for this PhD,
Yeah.
but outside of that, I'm trying to restructure my stroke around rotation as distinct from linear movement.
Yeah.
Um, I I came back from a world championships back in, I don't know, 2000 and whatever. Um, and I said, "That's it." I remember I came back to the after the presentations, and I said to my wife, "That's it. I'm finished. Too old, can't compete." And um, so I came back. This was in about, I don't know, 2005, 2006, and my my good friend Vlodek Targos, who's now living in America, talked me into changing that attitude. And what have you got to lose? I mean, only your time and maybe a few dollars on trips. So I listened to that advice from him, as I always do from Vlodek, and I had to think about it for 3 or 4 months, and I thought, now there's got to be something I can do to improve. So what started me thinking about it actually was, my son and daughter played basketball, and my daughter came back from the States many years ago and started a family. And her two children, my grandchildren, started playing basketball. And one day she was in the backyard teaching my older grandchild to shoot. And I was particularly interested in how she did that and what body segments she focused on, because it was all lower body. And I started to think, well, that's completely foreign to my philosophy. I'm very much upper body centric caster. And so, cut a long story short, I then started to communicate with a couple of universities here with respect to biomechanics advice. And I was very lucky to meet a lecturer in biomechanics here who we started having a number of chats over coffees. And anyway, that evolved into me formally studying biomechanics and casting. So what I'm trying, so sorry to digress. So, but in answer to your question, what I'm trying to work on is building speed from that proximal to distal patterning that other throwers do. And it doesn't matter whether you're throwing a discus, putting a shot, throwing a javelin, pitching a baseball, even throwing a hammer. It's all lower body through the torso, into the arms and then into the hand. And it's all done on rotation. The best example I could give for that is a discus thrower. They move in a linear manner, so they move across the circle. I don't know how the diameter of the circle, but whatever it is the linear distance they move. But they do that all based on rotation. So I started to think that maybe that has some applicability to casting. So that's what I'm doing. I've changed my thinking completely, and the studies I'm doing on movement analysis in the lab with the fly rod and fly liners has made me question everything. So so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to spin my way into a casting stroke, if that makes sense.
Right. That's very interesting. Of course, the big problem I see, one of our core issues, is we have to track straight, and so this obviously restricts everything, because as soon as we start the stroke, whenever that is, I don't believe it's when we first start moving, but whenever we start to apply the force, everything has to align. I think it's absolutely incredible what you're doing. I really wish I was. Maybe I'll follow your footsteps. What age were you when you started?
Oh, well, I think I can't remember whether it was my son passed away in 2005, so it must have been 2007, the 2007 World Championship. So I'm a slow learner, believe me.
Wow,
that chronology emphasises the slowness of my ability to learn. But it's like the thing that really tickled my fancy was when I started to read about javelin throwers. And I started to read some research papers about that. And it's amazing. I mean, the world's best javelin throwers, not that I'm in that class of casting, but I'm certainly well below the world's best casting level. But the theory's the same. The world's best javelin throwers eject that javelin 32 metres a second. Now, they have a run-up and a crossover leg before their impulse plant, which is when they establish their plant leg, their back leg, and their braking leg, their front leg. But in that plant, that impulse leg, they generate 20 plus metres a second of hand speed. So the run-up and the crossover delivers 9, 10 metres a second. They eject the javelin at 32, sometimes 34 metres a second. So in that plant impulse step, they generate 20 plus metres a second. Now, if you think about fly distance casting, we actually, excuse me, my dog's said hello. I don't know whether you can see him there. We actually replicate that plant step. We have a back foot and a front foot, but we don't generate anywhere near that speed. No. So I started to think, well, maybe there's something we can learn from other sports, particularly javelin. And tracking is absolutely critical. I could not agree with you more about the importance of tracking. But it's amazing, if you rotate your hips, then your shoulders, then your elbow, and if you just drag your hand behind it, so it's a slinging motion, that the hand tracks in a straight line.
Yeah.
Twiggy, go away. Excuse me. Come on. Yeah, it's amazing how compatible the two techniques are, because we meet the throwing technique that's based on rotation meets the linear tracking requirement of fly casting.
Right.
Really.
Okay. The other thing that I was thinking about, actually a post we had today or the last few days, was about this, because we were discussing this, but it was actually about when we apply the force. Because, for example, and I see it quite clearly, because you put the like, let's say your braking leg is your left leg, right? So you put the left leg forward and it's straight, okay, as the block. And it's a fault to have in javelin to have that leg bent. Whereas, I don't know everybody, but certainly I intentionally, excuse me, come onto a bent leg, get underneath the rod, and then launch the second half of the rotation, the force, like past, when the rod is, I always talk about when the rod butt hits the perpendicular, that's when I try to save the explosion for. Well, I get to the front leg, which is bent, and then I straighten from the front leg, which then assists me in turning that rod over in that second half. That's a different force application to a javelin, I think, which is building up to be fastest at this point, as it were, to be fastest at the perpendicular, because that's in the release angle, isn't it? So I was just wondering if that timing would make a difference as well.
Well, it's funny because the greatest javelin thrower in the world, Jan Zalesny from the Czech Republic, if you watch him in ultra slow motion, and there's videos on YouTube for that, he plants his leg, so he as he rotates his hips and drops his right knee, that activates that hip rotation. He plants his left foot, as in the contralateral foot, because he's a right-handed thrower. And at the instant that the full foot hits the ground, the knee is bent.
Okay.
And then he snaps the knee straight, and that's when the block happens. So right. it once again, it's not dissimilar to what you do.
Yeah.
And there are far more similarities than there are differences.
Yeah.
And don't forget the concept in other throwing sports of the block with the left leg for a right-handed thrower. Excuse me, it was my dog annoying.
No, it's fine. I can hardly see him.
Go away. Go away. She normally sits in here with me. God, I forgot what I was going to say now. Yeah, so that plant and that need for the left leg to be bent and then straightened, that only breaks the hips.
Right.
That's all it breaks. It doesn't break any other segment of the body. And what happens then, as soon as that left hip breaks, the rest of the rotation, and therefore the hand, just gets slung forward. It's like if you stand up and you rotate your hips and your left knee is locked or straight, you can't rotate any further. If you bend your knee, your hips continue to rotate. So what they do is, as they step forward, the elite throwers do so with a slightly bent knee, and then the momentum of their body moving forward jerks that knee straight, and bang, it breaks. Then the hip breaks, and all that accumulated force just gets channeled and swiveled up through the body into the hand. A lot of throwers who aren't elite, they'll plant their left leg with a locked knee, but it doesn't have to be planted with a locked knee. It can be bent and then straightened, and that seems to be the more effective movement.
So that's quite similar to, I think, what a lot of us are doing in fly casting, or some of us, certainly the people, not everybody, but certainly a lot of us. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So in your course, I mean, are you in a classroom of other people studying different sports and having exchange of information, or are you mostly studying on your own? How?
A bit of both. Because it's research based, there's a lot of individual work, but I've got 3 supervisors. One a PhD in biomechanics, one in physiology, exercise physiology, and the 3rd in motor learning. So I get together with them, and in doing, and sometimes then with other PhD students who are studying other sports and the biomechanics of those sports. So yeah, there's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas. It's not done through a lecture or a tutorial level. It's usually we'll meet up in the movement lab and, oh, g'day, what are you up to? And it starts from there. Wow. But the formality of the learning process is that I do the research, I bounce it off my 3 supervisors who keep me on the straight and narrow, and that's a very challenging thing for them. And then out of that should come two types of documents. One, some papers to publish, and the ultimate one is a 100,000 word thesis on fly casting or fly distance casting.
It's fantastic. I hope to be able to read that, John. I think that would be absolutely amazing.
I hope it doesn't bore the pants off everyone. But it's interesting because there's been no such or no similar research conducted. I did a literature search all last year. It was one of the prerequisites is to search the literature, identify gaps, and then justify how your research will fill those gaps. And in doing so, there's a mountain of information about fly casting, but very little research. So yeah, it's been an interesting study. I've learned a lot. Whether I can transfer theory into reality, and in fact whether the theory is correct, is still under debate. And that won't happen until probably the end of next year, when I can actually start looking at data and improving it.
Are you coaching people at the moment?
Yeah, I've got a couple of blokes here who want to go to Sweden. So we have every Friday I meet with another caster, and we spend the day casting our fly casting events. And that's interesting because it's interesting just I've tried to, pardon me, my apologies. I've tried to use myself as a guinea pig and change my stroke. But it's good to have someone else who's made the decision, well, yeah, look, I'm interested in changing. So I bounce a few things off him and we try things, and it's good. I enjoy it.
Takes a long time, actually, doesn't it, to rebuild a stroke?
Oh, it does. You know, I've got decades of habit, and it's very difficult to change. And look, the jury's still out, as I said, on one. Am I trying to change to a better stroke? Is what I'm studying better? That's yet to be decided. And if it is, can it be implemented easily? And it probably could only be implemented on new casters who haven't got, habits of an older stroke. But anyway, we'll see how it goes.
And you're primarily focused on hand speed, is it?
Yeah, I am at the moment, and I understand the distinction between hand speed and rod tip speed and the lags associated. But one of the hypotheses I'm considering is that the faster I move my two hands, the faster the line will be released. Gets back to that javelin. I want to release my fly line at 20 plus meters a second rather than 10 or 12 meters a second.
Sure.
And it's got to be done smoothly, and it's got to be done with correct tracking. So therein lies two challenges. Because that's where the time comes in. I mean, if you watch the best in the world in other throwing, it's very explosive, but it's smooth.
Sure, yeah.
And that's what separates the great from the not so.
Have you so in your environment there, you must have access to javelin throws of quite a high, quite a caliber. Have you tried teaching them fly casting?
It's funny you should mention that. As a matter of fact, I'm in the process of setting up some laboratory sessions with javelin throwers at the moment who will use a fly rod and line. Now, that'll be a challenge for them because, they'll have to use the left hand.
Yeah.
But people who, it's amazing, people who are skilled in accelerating movement through their body pick things up pretty quickly. Far quicker than an old bloke like me.
I'm sure. I mean, because Tor was both, isn't he? I think Tor competed for Norway in javelin.
Yes, yeah, he did. And you can, if you watch his casting, you can see some differences. Very much so. And it starts with his stance, even things like the length of his stance. But yeah, I just want to explore all of that and see where it takes me. Could be the biggest dead end of all time, but at 73,
I mean, I've always thought this is really what fly casting is missing. We have all the understanding about, well, not even all the understanding, but we have a lot of understanding about the loops and how they come together and how the rod works. We don't really have very much understanding of technique, of how the body works. And quite often it gets left by instructors who call it style and not technique. And you can do, and that seems to be like, it's almost not just that, not even, you don't want to touch somebody's style, but it's sacred that whatever they're doing has to be the right thing, and we can only change what the rod does, when fundamentally I think it's actually what the movement of the caster is doing. That's what we need to focus on, because that's what drives everything else.
Oh, it is. Look, the rod, it's like what's it? Well, you take any other sport that uses equipment, the focus is not on the equipment. Javelin throwers have minimal focus on the javelin. Sure, it's got a spin. Pole vault jumpers, it's about how they bend the pole rather than what happens with the pole, or how it bends. And rod bend and line acceleration, they're outcomes. I mean,
yeah.
The last time I put my casting rod and line in the corner of a room, it didn't do anything. It sat there inert until I picked the bloody thing up and started moving the thick end. and then that's what fly casting's about. Ulrich has done a lot of work. I love talking to Ulrich, and we had a lot of chats in Norway last year, and I'm really interested in the work he's doing and some of his masters and PhD students are doing. And it's really interesting to watch Bernd Johansson cast. And he works closely with Ulrich. They're good mates and casting partners. And Ulrich's done some really good work with respect to body movement. And all I'm doing is just, fiddling around with some edges, but we'll see how it goes.
Fantastic. I really enjoyed our discussion about blocking and breaking a couple of years ago, whenever that was, during lockdown.
That's right.
Maybe we should just sort of describe how do you see the stroke occurring? Maybe we take the back cast and the forward cast kind of mirror each other, don't they, in terms of weight shift, torso twist. Maybe it would be good and nice if you described, because I know you're much more eloquent than me when it comes to these things.
Oh, gee, you put me on the spot now, mate. Christ. It's interesting. Now I've got to preface these thoughts on the fact that you're talking to a bloke who came to fly casting, like as in trout distance, sea trout distance, from the ICSF world. When I first saw you cast, my original thought was, no, that's not the way you cast. No. I want the rod between 10 and 2, and then I want it to drift back and then hammer it. Okay, so that's the preamble. But the casting with, say, an MED really opened up my eyes and proved that my philosophy on casting was just damn wrong. I've gone back over it, and it was unsound from a biomechanical viewpoint, and very limited from a biomechanical viewpoint. The stroke that you follow and the other 5-weight casters follow is much more biomechanically sound. I think it will evolve a fair bit, because I think we need to focus on accelerating the rod tip far more behind the shoulder than we do. But putting all that aside, so given all that preamble, it's about accelerating that rod tip by braking and letting the next segment just follow along. So that back cast or that forward cast, it's a matter of rotating, first of all, in a linear manner, moving that elbow, and then rotating that elbow. And all the engine is in the joint and the lever of the elbow. And then when the shoulder can't rotate any further, because that controls this, that breaks it. That forearm breaks, and then the hand just follows. It follows along. So the speed in the hand, and therefore the rod tip, is a direct result of the speed of the forearm and then the brake. And the brake actually comes from the external rotation of the rotator cuffs in the back of the shoulder. Everybody can hold their hand in that position and rotate back to a certain degree. Can't go any further. So my view on casting is to hit that braking position of the forearm from the shoulder, if that's making sense. So you can't go back any further, and then just let the hand and therefore the rod flop over, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
it does.
yeah, and doing things like on that linear movement, having the reel and the rod sit inside the forearm, they're great aids. But at that point, when it flops over and it can't go back further than that angle, then that's the break. And this just happens.
So I don't do that's not how I do the 170 though. That's more how I would do open stance distance, but maybe not even that alignment. So I agree. I mean, on the open stance distance, I would come back, but I don't bring this. I wouldn't bring my elbow out to the side here. I turn the body, but try to keep this hand coming straight through. So I put the brakes. I put the brakes. I do brake the forearm, but I don't. I doesn't come from the shoulder. But on the 170, I get in. I'm at this alignment. So I've come. My upper arms. If you take, you would be able to draw a line from my upper arm through my shoulders to the forward target. So I would come over the top, and then the whole body would break there, and then the forearm would flail on the 170.
Yeah, yeah, because your shoulders have opened up parallel to the casting stroke.
Yes.
Yes. So
yes.
Where I'm coming from, and that's sound, right? I think the better of the two options is to not open the shoulders up parallel to the stroke, have them slightly closed, not a lot, but only 10 or so degrees. So it looks open, but it's, it's on. How can I, let's have a look. How can I explain this? So rather than the shoulders moving like that, they move slightly like that. So there's an angle of the shoulder line to the direction of the cast. Only about 10 degrees.
But that has to be because you have otherwise your hand would have to come through your head.
Yes.
So you would lean back a bit in order to facilitate that. There has to be there has to be an angle there. But it is basic. But the point is, it's not initiated by blocking. You were blocking, sort of blocking the shoulder. You were coming from the shoulder and then coming out, and then you were doing that, and that was limiting the move. That was limiting the angle that this hand can come back. But it hasn't done that. It's done that.
Yeah, I think the better stroke now, this is all evolving. I think the better stroke is to pull back to almost parallel, but only about 10 degrees, right?
Okay.
So it's still coming over the shoulder, okay, like
Right.
that, and then bang, flail open, and I can't get back any further because the shoulder blocks it. Then from that point, just let it continue to straight. Then the movement is forward, is body twisting, cock the elbow in, and then over the top.
Yeah.
I think that slight change on the back cast with the position of the shoulders versus the line being parallel to the line movement is the better of the two, because it allows you then to wind up your body on the forward cast better than the other stroke. I may not be explaining that particularly well.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll have a play. I'll certainly have a
Yeah.
play with that and see. Sometimes it's difficult to know what you're doing until you actually video it anyway. I've
Yeah.
been finding that in other sports that I think I'm doing one thing and end up doing something else.
You can following your back cast is great, and that's fine. The point is, I think, is where you start the forward cast from. And then if the arm is straight, not crooked, but it's straight, and the body has now turned to that position you espouse, then you wind everything up, leaving the hand behind. So you wind it up and then over the top.
Yeah, but you see, the problem, so I understand that, but the problem I have with all of that is I think all of this movement from full arm stretch pretty much until the hand is in front of the shoulder is a repositioning move. Because in order to turn that into part of the stroke, this line hand has to sort of come all the way over here and come up here to make that happen. And I don't really see the value in that. I just keep my line hand here in a better position to start the acceleration of the haul, because I want the most explosive haul that I can get. And that means having a good bend in the elbow with the hand kind of level with the shoulder, right? So I'm coming through, maybe a little bit above too. So it never comes over this side of the body, because that opens up opens up the elbow and I lose speed. So I want to have a good bend in the elbow. So if my rod hand is all the way back here, for the casting stroke to begin, this rod hand has to end up first in front of the line hand. So I think all of this part of this stroke here is slide. It's a repositioning move. Yes, we might gain something out of our body movement, might gain something out of it, but it's not accelerating the line until we get to this point where the rod is in front of the line hand. And effectively, that's where the stroke begins. And effectively, that's very similar to the original stroke, like what Steve does. It's just that the back cast is different, that we're getting into position, and then we have an open stance distance forward cast, which is very, very similar. I don't see it beginning from back here. Just because I can't see how you can move the line from that position.
I used to think that, and I used to watch Steve cast. I first watched Steve cast when he was 16, and it hasn't changed much. It's very much rolls the shoulder and punches the hand up, and the power he's got in his upper body allows him to do that. I don't want to cast that way. I want to get more speed into the rod tip and therefore line behind the shoulder, and not actually bring my elbow in front of my shoulder very much. I want all the action to be from behind the shoulder to that point and then over there. So not out there. I used to cast with my elbow out there, run out of arm, maximum rod path length for acceleration and force, all that stuff. Used to do that. Don't want to do that anymore. I wanted to generate far more force and speed behind the shoulder. And I think you can do that even with the necessity of hauling, because without keeping your hand in front of your shoulder. I think your hand can go back and they can travel together to that point and then turn over. It takes a bit of training, and there's a lot of work to be done on the torso to allow that to happen. It's good that your core has to allow you to do that without collapsing and twisting. But when you get it, it flies. Really does fly. I find it. I've changed so much. I feel a bit hypocritical in a sense that I've changed my views on casting in the last decade so often that I sort of feel a bit hypocritical saying, well, this is what I think. But I now am very positive that what I think now is what I want to think, if that makes sense. I think I've got a handle on the way I want to cast, far better than I've ever had.
And how does the hall fit into that?
That's interesting. The hall got to add speed to the line, not bend to the rod. We know we've a million times. So the hall can just flow on. Right? I used to be a little different to you. I used to believe that the hall doesn't even start until the arm is almost extended and the wrist snaps over. That's when you haul. So in right out there. But you start your haul close to your shoulder. The more I think about it, the better that solution is. I think you've got to start your haul earlier and build up the speed and have the speed coincide with the hand. So don't the old keyboard analogy, backstroke, backstroke, then forward stroke. Right? All translation and then rotation. No, I don't no longer subscribe to that view.
Me neither.
It's the same with the haul. Don't hold the haul back until that point, because this is weak. You've expired all the big muscles in the body. They're not contributing anything out there, but they are there. It's exactly the same as a baseball pitcher.
Yeah. Well,
you look at his elbow and torso position. As he squares the hips. I think that's what we should do in flycasting.
All right, because when I look at the hall, I agree. I used to think, this rod hand should be over there and then you haul, but I don't think that's the case now. And when I look at my cast, even though what I'm trying to do in my mind, it's certainly not what I'm doing. Because and the reason is because I think the haul, your rod hand should come down, and I think the haul should be this separation of the hands. It's because it's really from the stripping guide, and so to get that extra speed, if your hand's out here, your hauling is just like basically your hauling hand. But if you're in here, it's a separation of the two hands, which in effect, I don't think it quite doubles the speed, but it could double the speed if that probably does actually. It's certainly close to it anyway, because we've got this position here, and then you're accelerating by accelerating these two hands apart. So that's why I was asking about it, because when you come over the top, it obviously plays an impact on that as well.
Yeah, I think that as you come forward into that position and your shoulders externally rotated, and preferably if you can do the training, the forearm is almost parallel into that position. Then as soon as this forearm starts to rotate over from there, not out there, as soon as it starts to rotate, I think that's when you should start the haul. And when the forearm is in this position and it's going to just flick the wrist over, that's at that point the haul hand should be at its maximum speed, if that makes sense. And the rotation of the body just continues around. It follows through. It's all set up by the breaking of that left hip. You know, if you anyone can test that. Just grab a ball and throw a ball as fast as you can against the wall, right? And if you break that left hip, lock that left leg, and let the body just unwind, the ball will hit that brick wall a lot faster than it does if you don't. If that makes sense. So, yeah, it's all about winding up the torso and stretching the pectoralis down here, and then unwinding, letting that stretch release, because that accelerates the hand.
Okay. Are there people casting that way in the other games, in the ICSF games?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a lot of chats with Flodeck Targos. I had Heinz Meyer Henze out here for 3 weeks a couple of months ago. Him and his wife stayed with us, and he casts in a very traditional stroke. Builds up the speed, gets the hand out in front, and just powers it over. You know, hits it out there. Flodeck doesn't. He gets a lot more speed and power behind the stroke, behind the shoulder, than he does in front. Yeah, look, I need to finish my research and just see what the findings are. But if I look at every other sport, at the risk of drawing a conclusion, rotating the body rather than moving it in a linear fashion certainly generates more hand speed. So, and it's all done by winding up the pecs and the lats at the back. So they're contra big muscle groups, winding them up like you wind a towel, you know, and then let go. It's all rotation, and in doing that, the hand translates. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that allows you to get your tracking right. My view on it is that all your translation should be sourced to rotation of the body around a central axis that goes from the head through the groin to the intervening point between your 2 feet in your stance. That's my view of it now. Whereas my original thought was, no, it's all about moving your centre of gravity forward in a linear fashion in the same direction as the calves as fast as possible.
Right, okay. Right.
So there's that movement pattern, that's option 1, versus little linear movement, but mainly rotational movement, that's option 2. So it'll be interesting to see which of the two produces better results.
Yeah, well, I would think the rotation for sure, but also from the perspective of the haul, you know, because when you rotate the shoulders, you get. I always think of the rotation of the this rotation of the shoulders as being able to get the rod hand in front of the line hand in either direction. So the reason why, you know, when we rotate here, the rod hand is now behind it, you know, is going that way. It's the hauling is separated, but in order to make that same thing happen on the forward cast, the only way we can do that is to turn the whole body around so that this shoulder is front, so that would be the separation. I tend to think that the cast is very much built around the haul as well. I think, you know, it's difficult to, you know, I mean, I think it's so key to the distance is developing this fast haul and getting that in place. And so I've sort of, when I built my stroke up, I'm continually thinking about how can I make the fastest haul that I possibly can. And that put me into a position of just thinking about just the haul, not even the rod. How can I move? How can I actually accelerate this such, just like we think about with the rod, we block, in this case, we break the forearm, the upper arm, and then allow the forearm to go, and then wrist at the end. And the same thing, and what's the best starting position in order to make this haul. So on the back cast, it's horizontal for me, bang, and on the forward cast, I then change the position and come into this. So I take my hand to the ideal, what I think is the ideal starting position, and then develop the rest of the stroke around that, as opposed to developing the haul around the stroke.
Yeah, that's a fair premise, and nobody epitomises that better than Steve Rajiv. I mean, Steve's stroke, his right side of his body's powerful and sound and compact, very balanced, and all those things allow him to move his rod hand quickly. But what separates him from most other casters is his haul.
Unbelievable.
Fastest haul I've ever seen. He's missed his calling. He should have been a boxer. If you got in a ring with Steve Rajiv, that left hand jab, you'd never get in for a punch. He's amazing. But what I want to do is have people start thinking about optimizing their haul speed and their rod hand speed, both. Oops. Hello. Hello, Paul. Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah.
Sorry, no, that was my internet dropped out. Jungle internet. We got talking about Steve Rajiv's haul.
Yeah. So what separates Steve is his haul. What I would like people to start thinking about, and that's a very presumptive statement, is optimizing your haul and your rod hand speed. And I think that's where the next big step in casting will come from. You know, I see, when you were talking about your shoulder before, I believe the shoulder rotation is to just accelerate the hand, not position the hand. I think we're missing something if we allow the shoulder rotation to reposition the hand rather than accelerate the hand, if that makes sense. So
I understand.
So I would like people to start to think about, look, I want to throw this bit of fluff as far as I possibly can. So I want to throw the line as far as I possibly can. Now I've got two weapons that will allow me to do that. My right hand and my left hand, right hand, haul hand. I want both to be optimal at the point of line release, rather than one greater than the other or any other option, if that makes sense. And I think we can get faster. Well, I know we can get faster rod hand speed because other throwers do. As I said,
I totally agree. And we can definitely move the hand faster. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see it'll be interesting to see. I'm as I was saying on the board there, I don't know how much more distance there is. until we change the tackle. I think we're limited by the head length. I think I've always said, like, when you take a weight forward line, the distance you cast is proportional to the amount of line you carry, and that's really is very much determined by head length. Otherwise you lose stability when you have too much overhang. So I would be amazed. I mean, what Bernd has been throwing there indoors, it's 132 feet, I think, 40 meters he's thrown. How much more is there than that? It's difficult to imagine there being much more than that. I imagine there would be more than that if the head length was longer. There's no question. If we didn't have a 68.5-foot head or whatever it is, and we had a 90-foot head or an unlimited foot head, then there is no question we would cast more, because we would carry more in the back and we would get it to turn over. But it wouldn't surprise me. And that, I think, when I look at Steve casting, highly competitive with that, along with everybody else, I think it's because of the head length. It can still be carried in the way that he wants to carry his back cast. Whereas if that head length got increased longer, that stroke there of blocking and flipping from the wrist wouldn't be enough to carry. It's not enough to carry 90 feet of DT, for example.
Absolutely, and I think the relative results in the trout distance events by casters who are using two different techniques show that. And you can't argue with the data. And the data is there for everyone to see. If you want to win the trout distance event, then you've got to throw a 170 stroke. A 10 to 2 won't cut it. It might have. It did, but no longer. Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of people doing. There's not a lot of people doing. Not the 170. I was just Steve. Steve is still very. Steve is very competitive in that.
Oh,
I think he really struggled in England because there was a really strong wind, and that stroke, a really strong tailwind, and that stroke just isn't fast enough to penetrate that with the amount of carry that's required.
I can't do it. I can only speak for myself. I started casting the trout distance with a 10 to 2 drift.
Yeah.
Quickly moved to 90 feet, 100 feet, but hit the wall. Now, comparing me to Steve Rajeff is comparing chalk and cheese. But the point I'm trying to make is the stroke has its limits.
Absolutely.
But whereas the 170, it's obviously got limits, but it allows for far greater distance in the gap between the two limits. So it's the way to go. I thought it would, but it is.
What do you think about the Swedish? I call it the Swedish step that Bernd and usually most of them, in fact, are doing. The fact that they're all doing it,
Yes.
says something. If it was just one doing it, it would be different. But it's not. Ulrich's doing it.
Yes.
The other guys here, Stefan isn't, but a lot of the guys are incorporating that step. Now that says to me they've measured something in there, because they don't just do it because they like dancing. They've got a purpose behind that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a formula that predicates outcomes for other throwing sports, Torricelli's formula. And basically it says that the quicker I can move the object I'm throwing, the further it will go. So what the step does, it adds speed. Right? So as they step, before they start generating any hand speed, haul speed, they're moving the line. So it'll throw further. Now, the caveats on that is that it's got to be balanced, and you've got to still take advantage of the ground forces through your stance. But I believe the Swedes and Norwegians have achieved that. I have a different view on the way they step, but I don't have a different view on why they step. They step because they start adding speed to the line before any body movement, certainly any body rotation.
Yeah.
And I think is the key. I never used to step. I thought, what do you want to do that for? One, you'll fall off the platform, and two, it adds nothing to the cast. Couldn't be more wrong. I now step, and my casts when I step go further than when I don't step.
Okay.
Yeah,
the platform is the issue, isn't it? Because some of those platforms, you take a step, the platform goes down, and that now you've lost your stability, and you've also lost your ability to brake when your foot suddenly going down. Yeah. And that's why when I first went to the Worlds in Norway the first time, I was stepping, but I was closed because I wanted this. I just felt I got a better haul, and that's what I was doing then. And then as soon as I did that, I was in great danger of going over the front and going for a swim. So I changed, and I moved to open stance, and I stopped stepping, principally because of that. And so when I watch, and when you're stepping, apart from the stability, you're also worried that you might get it slightly wrong and just step over the front, right? I know Rick's done that in training up in the States. He has actually stepped off the platform and ended up in the water, right? Which is hilarious, but it's not what you want to be doing in the finals or in the World Championships, right?
Certainly a casting limiting move, that's for sure.
And so I'm more worried about that, and I don't want to be thinking about where my feet are going and am I going to stay on the platform. I want to be thinking about where my target, where my loop is going. So it's a real distraction for me.
Could I be pragmatic and suggest that in Norway, in Sweden, the platforms will facilitate stepping.
Right, okay.
So if I were you...
How do you know that? You've got inside information?
Oh, no, I'm just saying that, hey, it's a hometown event. Now, I could be completely wrong, but I would suggest that you will be able to step, and you can. I train on an ICSF platform, right? It's 1.2 by 1.5.
Yeah.
And I thought exactly the same as you did, that if I step, I'll fall over. But it's training. It's all about stabilising the core and getting the stance right. And you can actually take 2 steps. It's actually 3. In that platform length, you can step with your left, cross over with your right, step with your left, and cast. Right? You can do it, and it's well worth doing. And when I went to Norway, I watched Bernd and all the Swedes and Norwegian casters, and they were able to step off the platform. So you can do it if you train it to it. It's not easy, but the best way to do it is, if you're casting on the grass, just put a perimeter around you so you don't step outside that perimeter, and practice at home. Practice without the rod. So if you're going to, you've got to make a decision. First decision is, which is my lead foot? Now, if you follow most casters, their lead foot will be their right side foot. So Bernd, right-hand caster, ends up with his right foot forward. Now, do you want to stand with your end up with your left foot or your right foot forward. Make that decision, and then every time you get out of a chair for the rest of your life, do that little step.
Right. Okay.
And then when you can do that step in a 1.5 metre length and not fall over, then get some light weights and hold your hands at a casting distance apart, and then practice your little steps with those weights, and that'll increase your balance again. Then when you've got that and not falling over, then hold them, those little small weights, maybe 2 kilos, 1 kilo, 2 kilos in your hand. Then go through the casting stroke with the weights in your hand while stepping and not falling over. And once you've got that, honestly, Paul, you'll be able to step in whichever format you choose on whatever platform you're presented with. It's well worth the effort, trust me.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I will have to do that. The problem I find, I don't know about you, if I have a stroke that's built up, I have to use that. I can't have 3 different delivery strokes running at the same time, because then not one is not peaking if I'm working on 3 strokes, or if I really focus on one, I just have that. They all seem a little bit different. I mean, I make variations within it, but a variation that involves stepping or right foot forward or left foot forward is a massive change, and I have to commit. Yeah, I feel that I have to commit to that 3 months out, and stick with whichever I am. So when I rebuild a stroke, I either choose I'm going to do right foot forward or left foot forward, or in this case, stepping. I mean, I've been doing a bit, but
you've got 12 months before the championship. If I was in your position, this would be my thinking. And far be it from me to offer advice to anyone on casting, but the way I'd say, right, it's now July, so I would work hard on incorporating a step in my existing casting stroke up till Christmas. Then I would make a decision. Am I going to extend that practice till Easter or not? And then at Easter, make a decision. And then you've got 4 or 5 months to either build on it or throw it out. And if you throw it out, you're going back to what you've practiced for decades anyway. So really, risk of that change is pretty minimal. But the opportunity is great. Far outweighs the risk, as long as you manage the risk, So, you've got 12 months. Think about segmenting your training and then making milestone decisions somewhere over that 12 months. And if you go back to what you've been doing, cool.
Yeah, it's difficult to know. It's interesting. I mean, I just don't know how much more there is. I mean, I often get the impression that maybe 20 years ago we were still throwing some of the longest casts, and just getting onto form should be enough. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Are you training up the accuracy as well?
Yes. All casting interests me. Fly distance casting is my passion, but very interested in the accuracy. So I practice the accuracy 3 times a week, and I practice my distance 5 days a week. Now, sometimes that's not with a rod. Okay, so what I'll do is what I've got Twiggy, out the way. Come on. I've got a piece of dowel that's about 1 metre long, and the diameter of the dowel is such that I can hold it like a fly rod cork, like a grip. So what I do is I and I add weights to the end of that metre length, just sinkers, 2 ounce, 4 ounce. I don't go over 4 ounce because that then causes problems with the elbow.
Yeah.
And I'll say cast, but in my thinking now, I'll throw that weight as far as I can. So I'll do a lot of casting just outside without the line and building up that speed and that rotation.
Do the weights come off?
No, sorry, yeah, I tape them on with electrician's tape or duct tape or something, yeah. But a great training tool, for what it's worth, is, you know, those ball throwing things? Yeah. They're terrific. I use one of those a lot. Take the dog for a walk, but I do my casting practice. She gets some walking practice, and so do I. Yeah, and measure just how far the ball goes with the different techniques, and log them, keep a track, so diarise them, so you can see a progression of improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And work on your body. I mean, you do a lot of, you know, you're a lot fitter than I am, but yeah, work on your torso.
Yeah.
You know, and that balance, being able to accelerate that shoulder movement, rotation, quickly, and that builds up your power. So I do some lightweight work. I don't want to end up like Arnie Schwarzenegger, but
that'd be very inconvenient, wouldn't it?
It would be. Yeah, there's certainly question the pea in the bottle troop at the next World Championships. But yeah, I think we can get stronger so that we can produce more power. It's all about impulse. How quickly do you produce that power? So yeah, you can do a lot of casting training without a rod or a line, and that's what I do. There's a lot of exercises you can undertake, but the core, anything that develops your core, I think is beneficial to casting.
So, are you ready? So you're training a few guys for the next World. So have you got them doing weights?
No, not yet. I've got them doing a lot of stretching.
Yeah.
The weights will come next year. They don't need a lot of power. They're younger than I am, and they're stronger. So they don't need to generate more power. They need to generate more speed, as I think, I know I do. So it's about stretching. You can't. I know we've had a lot of discussions on the board about cueing. You can't cue stretching. That stretch and release concept, that, you know, winding up and then unwinding that I talked about, you can't cue that. You got to feel it.
Yeah.
And so stretching allows you to feel that.
Yeah.
If you throw the line rather than cast it, the first thing you feel is stretch down your pecs and down your lats. Now, if you don't feel that, then you're not holding that hand back far enough and rotating the body quickly enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get that shoulder around and then rotate the shoulder and keep the hand back there, so it comes forward like that. Yeah. Just like a baseball pitcher throws the ball. Now, there are differences because he wants to throw down, and whereas we want to throw up. But the generation of speed into the hand is exactly the same as what I think we could achieve in fly casting. So all of that external rotation that moves into internal rotation, that rotates the rod and generates the torque and all those things, that all comes from your ability to stretch and hold that stretch as you rotate your torso. The hand is back there. See, it's there. It's not, it's got to be over the top there.
Yeah.
It comes back to your point about moving out of the way so that you can throw, see that external rotation, and you can throw over the top. So in theory, the elbow should follow in the same plane as the plane of your shoulders. If you watch any picture in baseball, you'll see that, absolutely. And javelin throw is the same. Then it brings in a new concept of where I'm differing from what I used to do. Rather than having the elbow below the shoulder, I want my elbow to be above the shoulder, there in that position.
Yeah.
And when I get to that position, all my rotation of the torso is finished. My hips, my shoulders, so my belly button is pointing directly down the middle of the casting line. And then all I have to do is allow that to unwind. So the forearm and the wrist just to follow through. It's a different concept. And it's one that, you know, with all respect to javelin throwers and baseball pitchers, may be absolutely irrelevant to fly casting. It's going to be fun to answer that question.
I'll certainly I'll have a play with that, because I you know, one of the things I have noticed is when I've gone from this position here is how to get to this position here without coming out to the side, which is where the problem is. So you want to come in over the top.
Yeah. See, I'm starting to, I come over the top, and if you look at my hand, my rod hand is between my right ear and my elbow. It's not outside it or above it. It comes through in that position, and then
that solves it. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you do that, that allows you to get all of your speed behind the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then what happens in front of the shoulder is just release.
Yeah.
I mean, ignoring that all, but for the right hand, see, it's in that position. And that lay back, that external rotation of the shoulder or lay back is in a baseball pitching vernacular. Ends up with the forearm horizontal.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of stretching to get to that, but you can. And then just block the torso, and away it goes.
Well, I will try that tonight, and I will report back. Yeah, I can see that.
There's an expression that javelin coaches use, and I think it's a great one, because to me it epitomizes the position of the movement of the arm. What you want is for your armpit to be pointing to the sky. Your armpit is pointing in the direction of your line, like that. See? Not down there. There, exactly. Now, there. And then all you do is just flail that forearm over the top. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will. Thank you very much. I will have a good play with that. That sounds quite. It was always fun to play with.
It's a lot of fun. See, there was no greater advocate than me for terms like, you know, get the hand out in front, and look where's my elbow where's my armpit pointing here? It's pointing down at the ground, right? So get your arm out in front. You know, you run out of arm, and then you haul.
Yeah.
You hit the elbow down, and you push up into the bend of the rod. All those things I spent decades doing. I believe I was wrong in doing it.
You know, it makes a lot of sense, because on that back cast, it is, you know, it is flailing from this elbow straightening. Okay, you know, on the 170, and the line speed I generate from that is undoubtedly higher than the line speed I generate on the forward cast. I mean, there's, you know, Jackson Mars from your part of the world. He often throws back casts, and he turns around and throws back casts, and he often wins doing that. Okay, and it's very frustrating. But I can see that movement there. When you turn in, you come in here. It's the reverse, isn't it? It's once again, it is being driven by the elbow, as opposed to what most of us are doing, which is coming through and driven, not even necessarily with a wrist, but sometimes I use the fingers to turn that over. That's how late it is. But that there is that's a very different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the elbow. Well, there's the primary pivots are hip, shoulder, then elbow. The wrist just follows along. All in my view, once again, completely wrong. So anybody listening to this, take all of my words with a grain of salt. But my view is that all the wrist does is transmit the speed from the body into the rod. That's all it does. It just and in doing that, it just follows along. The impetus of the body pulls the wrist, and then when the rest of the body starts to decelerate, this continues to accelerate.
Yeah.
It works like a rod does.
Yeah.
You stop the thick end, the thin end continues to follow through.
Yeah, it's momentum traveling up through the body, and we stop various parts, and that momentum travels all the way in the final thing is, and that's a hell of a lot easier casting than most people cast, where they're trying to drive the rod back usually with their elbow or their forearm or whatever they're trying to do, as opposed to actually just trying to think about stopping various parts and allowing that to really travel up through the body. And that's undoubtedly, if there's a correct way of casting, that is it, as far as I'm concerned, is that weight shift, blocking the weight shift, torso twist, blocking that, blocking it in sequence and allowing it to travel up. Yeah, there's no question about that.
It's in fact, I read somewhere, some paper on, I can't remember what sport they were researching, and the authors actually used the fishing rod as an analogy.
Okay.
They said, look, your body, think of your body as a fishing rod, how it bends and straightens. So the body it bends, in our sense it rotates, builds up that power, and then you release it. Just like a fishing rod bends and then under weight.
Yeah.
Another analogy I read somewhere where it's like if you had a piece of steel, flexible, I'm not sure, I'm not an engineer, but steel that bends, whatever that is. And if you had a bit of this steel, pardon me, that long and so wide, and you put it in a vise and you bent it back and then let it go, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do in the conventional casting stroke. What they were saying was, okay, now pull it back and twist the steel, then let it go.
Yeah.
That's the throwing motion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you bend the steel back, you let it go, boom, like that.
Yep.
The throwing motion is to bend it back and twist it.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And then let that go. So you've got moving forward and rotating. And that gives you, in their words, the optimal hand speed.
I wonder how, I mean, you know, I have a stroke. So I'm just getting my charger for this. I have a stroke I call torque twist, which is where I actually twist the rod at the end of the stroke. And it's what I use for taking very fast shots because the line speed is higher.
Yes.
Problem is, when I've tried to apply it to distance, as I certainly have, as everybody I'm sure would, I get a small deviation in the rod tip and it just affects the loop. Don't get it quite straight, but it's certainly something I have explored because it's very much ingrained. So I'm just grabbing this. It's very much ingrained into my stroke, so these things tend to appear, don't they?
It's an interesting analogy, one worth exploring. If you think of your body as that rod that's bent and twisted, then that's what I think is the optimum movement pattern. But what will happen, whereas when you try and do that with the rod in a distance stroke, the forces make it unstable, okay?
Yeah.
In the rod. But your body won't be unstable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
It's built differently to the rod. So the instability of the rod will not transfer into instability in the body. So you can bend the body and twist it whilst being stable. And that to me is what we're after.
That actually leads into something I do want to talk quickly about, because it's something we were talking about earlier. And I really like the terms, but I don't fully understand the terms as I use them, and I'm sure I kind of mix them up. And that is blocking and braking.
Yeah.
As how that applies. Now, as I understand it, you have to correct me here if I'm wrong, but if I understand that, blocking is where we would utilize a part, you may get me wrong here, blocking is where we utilize a part of the body which gets in the way of any additional movement. I don't know if that's right. And braking is where we're actively decelerating. Is that how you would do it? So in other words, my foot position, let's say they're at 90 degrees angle, that would restrict my torso twist to a certain point. So if I change my foot position, that blocks my rotation.
Correct.
Okay.
I'd agree. I'd agree with that. That makes sense to me.
Okay. So how do you see the whole? Is that how do you see the whole? How do you see the two different sides of the body working? I like that analysis where you're turning and there's one side of the body breaks the other side. Is that correct?
Yes. See, in a sport like javelin, what they do, if you watch a javelin thrower, they will use the left arm, their non-throwing arm.
Yeah.
They will use that to accelerate the braking of the left side of the body. In javelin, the technique is arms back.
Yeah.
Right? Left hand is in this position. And then as the body rotates through that straight line, then this pulls down into the rib cage. Okay.
Yeah.
And that pulling down helps rotate the shoulders.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that adds to the braking of the whole left side of the body and allows the right side of the body to wrap around and accelerate through. So, but if you think about that, that motion that you see a javelin thrower perform with their left hand is a haul. It
Yeah,
but it
yeah.
happens. It happens far quicker than we want it to happen.
Yep.
Right, because he's hauling with his left hand well before his right elbow gets to the axis of his shoulders. But it's a haul in our terminology.
Yep.
So why can't we incorporate that javelin thrower's haul a bit later in our stroke and make it a casting haul?
Yeah.
They're completely compatible if you think about it and you train for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And sticking the foot up at the end of the stroke, I guess, is also sort of that balance, because we can't take a step forward because we're above the water or we're going over the line. Whereas a javelin thrower, they kind of stop a couple of meters back, don't they? And then sort of and then still take a step forward, which I don't know. I don't think there's a benefit for us doing that because we're so close on the distances. Our distances are within half a meter. You know, the top 6 or 8 people, you know, they're all throwing within half a meter at the moment. And so if you're half a meter back from the platform, you've got a problem, right? So there has to be significant gain in order to do that. I wonder if there is. I wonder if there is another 4 or 5 meters there.
I don't know, but it's going to be fun trying to see. Yeah. So I think we certainly are limited with the line, particularly in the trout distance, the MED. I mean, you've got that thick running line, and so there are massive constraints on your performance. But I'd like to think that if we optimize both hand speeds, we'll get a bit more.
That'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, my other feeling is if we could just tighten up the loop and without sacrificing too much. If we had the same carry and a tighter loop, you know, maybe we could do it with less. Maybe we don't need. Maybe it could be done with less speed. I don't know, because I look at Tor. Tor has very, very tight loops. I'm not a big fan of how he moves, but obviously it's very successful and it obviously works, and it's his background. And there's something in that stuff that I don't understand, but I don't throw javelin, right? And it's very effective because he's won it, right? And he's certainly put it past me. But I think the difference is with him is his loops are tighter. That's basically where I think, you know, that extra half meter or meter or whatever it was in the championships was. And so that you know, when I look at Rick Hartman all those years back, you know, when I got inspired, you know, to sort of learn the 170 stroke, he had the tightest loops I've ever seen, and still actually had the tightest loops that I've ever seen in this competition. You know? And the problem is, as we increase more speed, we get more counterflex, and so that ends up opening the loop. But with the unrestricted rod stiffness, we can actually throw stiffer and stiffer rods in order to reduce that. So yeah, I mean we're at 10 weights now. Maybe we end up using 14 weights.
Yeah, I believe me, I've tried. It doesn't work. There's a diminishing returns after a certain ability of the rod to bend and recover. But it's interesting that issue of counterflex. Just excuse me a minute, I'll just put this light on. It's a bit better. I think we can minimise the negative impact of counterflex by focusing on the trajectory and that throwing action behind the shoulder rather than the in front of the shoulder casting action we all employ.
That's what our friend Peter Hayes once told me what he was trying to do with the T120, where he was trying to stop it earlier so that the counterflex is in the direction of the trajectory.
Yeah, that's the secret. If you watch the good 120 ICSF casters, they all have one thing in common, in that they stop the rod, or they release the rod, the line, before the rod gets to the vertical. They throw it up, not on. And the left hand doesn't rotate under the right armpit.
Yeah.
It locks, bang.
Yeah.
And they're throwing really heavy lines, and the counterflex is minimal. Yeah. And what counterflex there is in the direction of the loop, the trajectory. It's not pulling it down, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what we've got to do is get our rod tip path in counterflex, when it goes into counterflex, just before it does, to be travelling on the same trajectory as the loop.
Yeah.
And then the counterflex will be minimal impact on the arse end of the line.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think there's some opportunity therein that will move our fly a bit further. I think there's a lot we can do with better matching trajectory, rod tip path before counterflex than we do. Because we all tend to throw the loop parallel. And therefore counterflex, every millimetre of counterflex impacts the backside end of the line.
Yeah.
I think we should change that. And
I throw up. I throw up at 15 degrees. I measured it, but the issue is
should go higher.
I can't do it tells because it's when you got 90 feet of line back there, not 90 feet, but you've got 80 feet of line back there, and you start to change the direction, you have this huge dangling end coming through, which is where the problem is.
So if you didn't have to change the direction, what would happen?
If how do you mean?
Okay.
If let's say there wasn't ground behind me and I could throw lower, I would. Yeah. I would throw lower. And the reason is because once that loop is, I don't think it makes any difference for the loop unrolling. I think approximately our forward unrolling shoot to loop straight is determined by the amount of line we've got outside the rod tip at the back of the house when we start the stroke, right? So if we've got 60 feet back there, maybe we can shoot 30 approximate numbers. Okay, it doesn't matter what they are, but we know that we know that it's very highly linked. But once it's straightened, it then can carry. And that's why I tilt it up, because I know there's another 10 or 15 feet there. Once it's straightened, it's at this angle, and it's going to carry on. It's going to carry on shooting, and it's going to give me more distance. So for me, the lower the back cast, the higher the forward trajectory I can get. But if I break the 180, I've now put a loop. I've now put this curve in this fly line path. And this part of the line is going to want to come in this underneath. And sometimes it does come underneath. Other times it sort of comes around and up. So you get this S. Whatever happens, you've got this dangle. If I honestly believe if we could get rid of the dangle, and the dangle is a major problem, particularly with a 170, because we've ended up with the rod flat. And now the rod's going to come up. Getting rid of that dangle, and we've got a long carry as well, so there's sag. If we could get rid of the dangle, I think that's where there's another X amount of feet just on that. And I think actually that step potentially helps get rid of the dangle. That,
Yeah.
that's like that big.
I think it does minimise it. But the question I'd ask would be, taking that example, if you didn't have that angle in the trajectory, but it was like that, then the back end of the line would not travel.
It would. Yeah, it would. But if you've got 70 feet of line back here straight, how can you get that up to there? The only way you can do that is by stopping there.
Well, yeah, excellent question. I think that's the hub of the discussion. My view on it, and could be wrong, love a dollar for every time I have been. My view is that's the position that will allow you to achieve that, not that. Right? If the angle between your rib cage and upper arm is about 120 degrees, I think you've got the best possible trajectory. And will give you the best shape in your loop. And you won't get that result. What gives you that result, in my view, is all your action in front of the shoulder. So when you get to here and then we dip and push up, I think that limits a lot.
Yeah, I do think the amount of line carry is one of the issues. We are talking, is it what we're talking about? We're talking what, 72, more than 70 feet of fly line outside the rod tip, about 76, something like that on this distance, or even possibly a little bit more. But put 76 feet of fly line out there straight. It's very difficult to change the angle according to what we're doing on tip path after it's been straightened. I mean, you can, even when you alter whatever you then do afterwards, it still leaves 60 odd feet at a certain angle. So I think in order to make that change, I don't think we can just make it in the stroke afterwards. I think we have to make that change before we get to that stroke, probably in the previous stroke, by putting it somewhere. That's where this block, this open stance distance back cast is effective, because it leaves the rod tip in that position, and then you've got the straight line. So if you go from that angle, you haven't got, you can go wherever you want, but you've kind of at the position you want to be. But if you're at this position, just relocating in any way is going to puts a little curve in that path.
Yeah, I think though, going back, right, blocking, and then following through. So you start with that straight arm, and all of your impulse is built up behind the shoulder. You will minimise the negative effect of that long line. That's what I think, if that makes sense. So, because I think what exacerbates the effect of the long line is what we do after the shoulder.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. You've got to catch it back there, right? Because from that position to that position, whatever the shape of the line is going to follow is set. So you've got to change it from there to there.
Yeah.
And that's where I think changing the angle of your upper arm and coming through in that position, right, with that between there and there, that will allow you to minimize that.
Yeah.
That's
certainly, I think // is actually incorrect. I don't think it goes bang, 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 and then turn over. I think as you're coming forward, you have certainly with the stroke I'm using, you have to start turning the rod as you're coming forward. But the important, when I apply the power in a way, I think it's at the perpendicular over. I think that's the most important part. I know that you're thinking now up to the perpendicular, and my thinking is after, and it will be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how that difference is.
Yeah. See, it's like accuracy casting. Do you translate and rotate? If we forget distance casting for the moment, then you can. I think the best way to cast, or the better way to cast accuracy, is to rotate through the stroke rather than translate and rotate.
Totally.
And yeah, I practice that in my accuracy casting. I just, I want to, once again, I want to feel the difference through my thumb.
Yeah.
At the start of the stroke, my focus is on what do I feel, because I use a thumb on top grip for accuracy. So what sensation am I feeling on the pad of my thumb in the first few degrees of the stroke? And if I can feel the rod tip under tension, then I'm fine. If I can't, put it down, start again. So I want to rotate through the stroke, and the American casters do that brilliantly.
Yeah.
And they've done it for decades. It's been the essence, the fundamental of their accuracy casting philosophy. Yeah. Why? Yeah. Because it damn well works.
Yeah, and I think and I have watched some guys trying to rotate at the end of the stroke in accuracy, but the problem is being consistent, because you've got extra speed, and if you're not careful, it kicks, and you don't want it to kick. You want it to hover, and I think that's really why it's better to rotate through the stroke. I love it. I mean, accuracy is one of my things. I've got a floodlight here on the back of the boat. I'm waiting for guests. I've got accuracy rings on the top of the boat, sticking them out there and having, if we used to play pool, there's a bar on the other side of the lake there. I used to get really good at pool because I was in there playing pool every night for a couple of hours. And if I can do that here in the back of the boat, I think I'll be unbeatable.
I don't doubt it.
Well, maybe I don't know if I'll ever beat Steve, but I would certainly hope to be a higher level than I currently am. Very inconsistent.
Steve, in a lot of ways, sets a fair benchmark. In a lot of things, but the plane in which he casts and the coordination of the rotation are I think, his two fundamentals. Yeah, and that's what I think everyone should try and replicate.
All of them. I mean, Chris and Glenn and Maxine. I mean, they're just
they're all the same, and those two things permeate all their styles. They're, as I said before, and the reason that is because it bloody works. The more they do it, the more targets they hit.
Yeah, you could blindfold them and they'd hit them.
Yeah, you
literally, you could. I mean, it's just so ingrained. But if it's like anything, if you repeat something 100 million times or however many times, it's not 10,000. I know that. It's like, how many times they've done it. That's probably been the core thing for 40, 50 years or more of training.
Well, Steve's been moving his accuracy rod that way since he was 13 or 14. So, he's made no change to his accuracy or distance stroke. So it's, use the term, it's grooved. And a wonderful caster. Absolutely brilliant.
I saw some changes actually in his five. I don't know if it's conscious, but I've seen some changes in his 5-weight distance stroke on the delivery. Compared over the last certainly over the 10 years between first and the last time I saw him there, and it's much more. It's a wider delivery arc.
Yes.
There's no question. Before it was very truncated, but I think he has opened up a little bit in that. In certainly the last 6 years or something like that. But
I would agree with that. I think getting back to, we talked about before, external rotation of the shoulder. If you watch all the best casters, you'll find that Steve gets more layback than anybody, or greater layback than anybody. And when he transfers that into internal rotation, so that position into that position, he generates far more speed than the average caster. And that's, so what he does, it'd be interesting to get Steve into a lab. If I would, talking through another appendage here, but I would bet my bottom dollar that if you got the 10 best casters in the world, distance casters, plus Steve together, that Steve's left hand would be faster than anybody, but I would very strongly suggest his right hand would be faster than anybody. And it's because of that pattern, external and internal. He does it better than anybody. And that's what makes him so good. So
also the mental game. I mean, not affected by the pressure. Or I mean, I've never seen Steve choke. I wouldn't even think that's possible.
No, he handles himself exceptionally well in casting tournaments. I don't think I've ever seen him nervous, but not that I ever would, because his demeanour doesn't allow you to notice that. Internally, he might be, but externally, no illustration at all of nervousness. He knows what he's got to do. He's practiced it. He just gets out there, takes a deep breath, and lets it all happen.
Interesting. I was watching the scores in the best of the West. If you watched him, the scores, it was like maybe 105, 108, 112, 100, whatever it was, but it was a progression in there. And I suspect that, I don't know if he does it, but I think there is like a little, like a sequence in there that he goes through where he doesn't start at trying to throw 100% effort, because that's risky. So get one in and then gradually sort of build it up. And that's obviously, and I think that's a mistake with a lot of competitors in the world. They go there and they just try to, right from the get-go, they're trying at 110%. Whereas what they need is a little program, a little sequence that they can get to get everything under control, and gradually move into it. They've got 4 minutes. I'm used to casting in 2 minutes, right? But in that 2 minutes, the stuff we do in the UK, in that 2 minutes, you need to be going full speed, but you don't need to be going full speed for 2 minutes. So you should have a little routine. How plan your 2 minutes? Don't just go for it.
Absolutely fundamental. And if you think about Steve's background, it makes sense. He spent decades wanting to win Champion of Champions, not individual events. When Steve gets on the plane, his focus, once again, this is a huge presumption on my part, but I believe his focus is on winning amassing the most number of points over 9 events, and what used to be 11, to win the World Championship, Champion of Champions. Okay? If he wins a fly accuracy, a fly distance, or a plug accuracy, plug distance, that's great. But his focus is on winning the Champ of Champs. So he can't afford to stuff an event up. He can't afford to have a zero result, like a break-off or tangles or anything like that. So I believe you're absolutely correct. He does structure his elapsed time to a very a very disciplined routine.
Yeah.
And it's because of that outcome he wants. And that just flows through into his individual events. Very disciplined caster.
I think that's what we should have in I know that we have that now appearing in our fly casting events, right? That there is a chance. I don't think there should be two. I think there should just be one, and you have to do all six to make it happen, because that would actually get people doing the spey casting and vice versa. And I think that would be a much better system. But that should ultimately be the trophy, that you really want to win, and but you have to enter all six disciplines.
Yeah, well, it's in the to me, casting's a decathlon, or a pentathlon. Yeah. The bloke who wins the champion of champs, to me, is the best caster in the event.
Yeah.
Not the bloke who wins 3 of 6 events and comes second last in the other 3.
Yeah.
But that's just that's a personal view.
So I mean, so your history. How did you get into this? How did you start competing?
Oh, when I was a kid, I used to go with my brother and father to you would have heard the Goulburn River in Victoria, maybe not. Okay, it's a large tailwater trout fishery, probably 150k northeast of Melbourne. And we used to go up there for a week at Christmas and Easter, and I used to stand on one side of the bank and throw spinners across. Never touched a fish, never saw a fish. And one day I was doing that, and a bloke with long rubber boots on and a long rod and walked up behind me, and 50 yards upstream walked into the water and started casting to these rising fish and caught one. So my immediate question was, what'd you catch that on? What bait or spinner are you using, mate? And he told me about fly fishing. So I came back to Melbourne and I went to a fly casting club, the Red Tag Fly Casting Club. I think that started in Melbourne in 1932. And I saw these blokes throwing to targets. Fell in love with it.
Right.
Never touched a cricket ball or a football since. I've just been interested in casting.
Wow.
So we got into it, at an early age. I mean, there was always, with me, having a family, charting a career, trying to get an education, all those things. Life gets in the way, but casting's my passion.
So when did you first go to one of the World Championships?
First championship I went to was England in Scarborough in 1973.
Wow. And how often have you been? Is it most years or?
I hate to think, because the next question is, what impact has it had on my bank balance? So I don't want to go there. So next question. No, I'm not sure how often. I love I love going to love going to casting tournaments. I love the competition, but I love the people who were there and the learning experience it allows, to watch other blokes cast and talk to them about why they do it. What do you do? Why do you do it? How do you do it? The old what, how, and what.
Did you when you first started, were there other Australians going?
Yeah. Plug cast, believe it or not, back in the 60s and 70s, plug casting was far more popular than fly casting. So I went away in 1973 with one other fly caster and 4 plug and surf casters.
Oh wow, okay.
And then blokes like Peter Hayes came along, and John Rumpf, and younger, 16-year-old casters, Rodney Foy. They went to world championships, and over probably a period of the 70s through to the 80s, the dichotomy changed from plug to fly, and now fly casting is far more popular, but plug casting is getting a resurgence, I notice now. So yeah, it's interesting, but the people make it for me, and the opportunity to learn something.
Yeah.
I used to love going and watching. I'm showing my age, but go to a world championship in the 70s and 80s, and up till 96, when the Eastern Bloc countries would sometimes attend, and to see the different evolution of casting stroke in Eastern Europe compared to Western Europe, compared to the United States. There was 3 distinct camps that evolved 3 distinct casting strokes. Very, very different. And it's interesting. It was always interesting to watch the Eastern Bloc countries cast, because their singular focus was on line speed, and their loops and line speed was just spectacular, if that's a term I could use. Far faster, far narrower than I could ever hope to generate. They were just, some of those blokes were just absolutely superb. And it's such a tragedy that we had that situation, that that the world couldn't compete openly, because, gee, we lost an opportunity. 40 or 50 years of opportunity foregone. It was
it's mostly, I mean, I don't know. I mean, how is the events in terms of participation nowadays compared to back in the 70s and 80s?
I think the halcyon days of casting everywhere was certainly there was two periods, in the 50s and then 70s and 80s, and then now it's in decline. I don't know whether it'll ever pick up again to those levels. I mean, there was, go to a world championship in the 70s and 80s, there'd be 100 people per event, and that was limited because, I can remember talking to Wolfgang Feiger, in the German casting coach, in I don't know, where was it? 96 in Madrid. We were having a siesta together, and he was telling me there was 35,000 registered casters in Germany. Now that was a bit of an overkill, a slight exaggeration, because in those days, what you used to get a fishing license in Germany, you used to have to pass a casting test, right? So, but their casting, the numbers of casters were 10 times what it is now, 20 times what it is now, all fighting one another to get on their national team.
And in Australia, I mean, there's a lot of clubs in Australia. Do you have inter-club competitions?
Yeah, we do, but unfortunately only centred in Melbourne. Casting is just Melbourne-centric, unfortunately, Victorian-centric. I should say Victorian, because there's a casting club in Ballarat and a casting club in Geelong, and then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Melbourne.
Oh wow, that's a lot.
And 3 casting pools. We're blessed in Melbourne with 3 purpose-built casting pools.
Yeah.
One of which in Fairfield is an L shape. So the 2 are 60 metres by 10 metres wide, and one L goes north-south, the other L goes east-west, and at the end of every L there's a 70-foot square pool on the end. And we used to cast all our fly distance, including double-handed on the water, at this venue because it could accommodate it. Yeah, not used. They're not used anywhere near to the extent they used to be. Yeah,
It's a shame, isn't it?
yeah. It's it ebbs and flows, but it's certainly in a lull at the moment, and I fear for its future, quite frankly, in Australia. It's a pity we can't get together with casters in other states and try and generate some interest, but there's just not the interest there. Tried, but
Yeah, I mean, I know that I got a few friends in Brisbane. I mean, they have clubs, but they're not interested in casting. They're interested in fly tying. I mean, there's some guys there who are very interested in casting, but it's very, very limited too, I thought.
It's the same in Melbourne. The clubs, I think fishing clubs in Melbourne have had a decline in membership over a decade, maybe 2. They peak and spike within that general trend of decline. Yeah, the attraction for clubs are fly fishing and fly tying, casting enough to catch a fish, but the sport of casting is now not a preference.
So you've been going. 73 was the first one. Did you say 73? So has techniques changed much over the years? You say there was 3 different techniques. Does did one dominate?
Well, there's in the 80s, really strong countries, casting countries like Germany, Sweden, Norway, they started casting fly distance with wider arcs, because the Eastern Bloc countries always had an extremely wide arc, going from 170 to, I don't know, 40 or 50 degrees. And some European Eastern Bloc countries were casting what we know now as a typical 170 stroke. It was stopless, forward and back.
Yep.
And but the American stroke, that 10-2, that permeated American casting, well, since I saw, from the 50s, when blokes like John Tarantino were casting. So they had that 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock drift and then hit it. And with the success of Steve on the international scene, some Europeans started to think, well, maybe the shorter stroke is the better. So you went from 170 to horizontal to 45 degrees to a 10-2 stroke. It sort of moved. To me, the best distance casters I've ever seen Czech casters who cast a very wide stroke, not a fully 170, but wide. Certainly the Polish casters in the 80s were casting really wide stroke and very high wide speed. And then that permeated through into the Swedes and Norwegians in the 80s and 90s. Blokes like Harold Marl, Nils's younger brother, Oyvind Foyland, just absolutely superb casters. And their stroke was probably like that, on the back cast. So they drop the rod right back and then accelerate it through to a block on an increasing rod tip path to get trajectory. So yeah, it fluctuates. I think my advice to a bloke starting out would be, or a girl starting out would be, pick a technique that suits your body. So if you're built like Steve Rajev, yeah, you could play with a 10-2 stroke. But if you're built like most people are, and that's not like Steve, you don't have his physical power, then start off with a 170. And if you want to truncate it, we'll do so, but start at the 170. You may move from it, but you may stick with it. And then just work on your flexibility, then your power, and focus on line speed. To me, all the casters, when I've got on a plane to come home and I've been sort of thinking about, what's the next meal, in between that period, I start to think now, who really impressed me? And when I think about all the blokes and some women who really impressed me with their technique, it's all about speed. Speed of both hands reflected in narrow, tight, fast loops. And I'm convinced that the modern technique of distance casting allows us to capitalise on speed and spear point loops. The 10-2, I think, is limiting.
Oh, look, there's no question for me. I mean, so my history was I sort of had I had a stroke that was great. I wasn't really competing, and then somebody came for a lesson, and they learnt my technique, and then they went when we had my first ever competition, and he used his own stroke and his old stroke, and he beat me by 10 feet, right, or 10, 15 feet. So that's no good. So come back next week, became really good friends, and I learned his stroke. So all of a sudden, or I think maybe 2 weeks, all of a sudden I was, it was neck and neck. So I'd gone from 105 to 110, 115 in the 5-way. Then I went to the States and cast with a lot of those guys. And then I cast next to Rick. And Rick was thrown over 120. Now, whenever I stand next to somebody and they're casting further than me, the only thing I can think of is they have a better technique. There is techniques that's really the thing that separates us. And the only way I can deal with that is to learn it. And so I go, and if somebody ends up casting another 5 or 10 feet further than me, side by side in the same conditions, I'm going to learn what they're doing. I think that's you can develop your own stuff as much as possible, but when all of a sudden something comes along and it's better than what you're doing, you just have to just drop everything and go, right, I have to learn this. I'm not going to take my thing further if it's so far behind.
I couldn't agree more. The results speak for themselves. If someone's throwing further than you, and they do it more than once, then you've got to ask yourself, what is he doing or she doing that I'm not?
Yeah, you've got to be there. You've got to be there, though. I don't think you can't read those results on the internet because you have absolutely no idea what's going on. There's a 30-foot difference or 40-foot difference depending on which way the wind is blowing. So you need to be there.
Yeah, you do. But if you're there and you see it, you've got to look at someone and say, what are they doing that I'm not? or vice versa. And then have a look at, now, what did I achieve today and what did they achieve today? Where are the gaps? What am I going to do about it? I mean, it's our story. It's like any sport. You can always say, no, I'm happy with what I'm doing. There was other reasons other than technique that meant I didn't win. You can take that attitude and
it's an excuse. But people like to make excuses for themselves just so that they can feel happy, and that's okay. But I mean, the reality is, like, people say, "Oh, it's all competition. It's not relevant to fly fishing," and you get that all the time. Or, "I don't need to learn to cast. I catch fish." All of these things exist. But I think we understand that it's at the end, ultimately, it's all about technique. And it's all useful, I catch more fish because I cast better. There is no question about that,
Exactly.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, we keep referring to Steve. Is Steve a good fisherman? Does he catch fish?
Yeah, I haven't fished with Steve, but
the average American.
He's gone off with Gordy Hill. I know that Gordy Hill's down there and fishing, and he goes down quite regularly and fishes for tarpon with him. So, and he's obviously that's really going to work for his casting, because I'm sure he can put it right, and I'm sure he can probably put the tarpon's mouth. So yeah, it's very good, very good. I think he fishes with Steve.
He is. I know he is, and you got to ask yourself the question: is Steve a better fisherman than the average American fisherman or angler? If he is, why? Well, one of the reasons is his ability to cast.
Yeah.
So why do I cast it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know what he puts more hours into, but I know he can certainly fish. I haven't fished with him. Be interesting. I'm much more dominated on the fishing. I do the casting as I love the casting, and I'm I'll practice it and I'll train it. But my primary objective actually is to have a use for it. That's why I've never picked up the double-handed rod. I have absolutely no fishing use for the double-handed rod. So I just haven't learnt it yet.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. I love. I don't do it now, unfortunately. I can't wander up small streams, but I love small stream fishing for trout. And just see trout in the water and see them shake their fin and come to the fly. It's the thrill of the take for me. Everything else is a bit of an anticlimax, but yeah, I love my trout fishing.
You get down to Tassie?
Sorry?
Go down to Tassie often?
Not for years. Lake's good. I enjoy it, open water trout fishing, and Tassie's great. But yeah, trout, small stream fishing is always my go. I love the streams in northeastern Victoria. But before the 90s, it was wonderful fishing in Victoria, the eastern part of Victoria, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, trout became an introduced species and fell out of favour, and then the drought hit us for 10 years and decimated fisheries, and it's never come back. But New Zealand's good. I love trout, but the small trout streams are my favourite.
Yeah.
Saltwater fly fishing doesn't do much for me. It's bang, they're on, and then hang on, and when you can, try and crank the reel. That to me doesn't do much for me.
I like the sight fishing in the sort, like on the flats, so where you're seeing a fish and you're making a shot. I mean, for me, sight fishing and taking shots is the pinnacle. It doesn't matter if it's taking shots at trout, but it's also nice to take shots at big. I mean, there's snakehead fishing here. Yeah, they fight hard, but it's not about the fight. It's about putting the fly in the right place and the fish eats. So But you know, I'm very. I mean, I just wish there was a world championship competition where you'd be sitting there, something would pop up for a second and then disappear, and you have to hit it. I would be good at that. So that's really what I focus on. So I love taking shots. I like the visual aspect, putting the fly in front of the fish and then seeing what happens.
Yeah,
And
so
because here is very green, you can see the fish. You wouldn't think you see it, but you see them when they're near the surface because you're looking into green and they're black, you know, that you're just a black shape. So you actually see the fish because of the green background.
yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? I enjoy that. I've done some tarpon fishing, and but I like my trout. Yeah. Australia's lucky in that it's particularly saltwater. There's so many varieties of fish. But the sight fishing is great. That's the turn on for me.
You have some of the best saltwater fly fishing in the world for sure. I mean, all that top end, particularly on the west coast, is fantastic.
No, it's good, and I hope it gets looked after over the decades by governments and but unfortunately, I think throughout the world we suffer with this malaise of, 10 years ago it was better, and you should have been here, 20 years ago.
But that's probably the truth. That's the problem. It's not just it should have. We actually should have been. I mean, I've been here 10 years now on this lake, and I tell you, better 10 years ago than it is today.
It's unfortunately that's symptomatic of fishing everywhere.
Yep.
So you've got to enjoy it now, because
protect it would be the best thing. But trying to get people to do that is, climate change. We've got too many people eating fish, and it's just so difficult.
Enjoy it through protection. Very important. So you've been there 10 years. My God, I remember.
Yeah, 10 years. I came here when we met. Well, I was cycling that trip, wasn't I? Well, that must have been 10. That must have been more than 10 years ago, because that was the first time I came to Malaysia, and then that was my first trip after that. Because I went after Australia, I came to Malaysia for a few weeks, and that was my first time. And then I came back 3 months later, and then I started coming back for 4 months of the year. And after 2 trips, I said, I'm not doing very well. I'm going to buy a boat. I'm going to live in the jungle for a year and see what happens. And that would have been about 8 years ago, I think.
You're amazing.
It's getting time for me to leave, John. I'm actually planning on getting away from here, because 10 years is enough,
I know you've made comment that you want to sail, and
that's the next plan. So I'm trying to sell 666 rods. That's what I'm. That if I can sell 666, that's a sailing boat, and I'm off. It'll take a few years, but it will happen. And so
that's great.
I think it'll be great. Slightly terrifying as well. You see pictures of 60-foot waves. I don't think it'll be. I hope not 60 foot, but you certainly see 20 and 30-foot waves, and I've met people who sailed in them. But hey, it's the next thing. I don't want to be sitting in a house for the next 10 or 15 years. I want to go and sail. And what a great way to get saltwater fly fishing. Spending 10, 15,000 US in a week's fishing. I just sail there and spend a month there and then move on. Perfect.
More power to you, my friend. More power to you. So what's Ashley think of sailing?
No, she's cool with that. Yeah, before we got married, we discussed this. So this is not suddenly a surprise for her. So she's learning to swim. I kind of figure that's important. But
that's a good starting point. Did you read about that bloke who got rescued yesterday? He spent 3 months.
An Aussie bloke. Yeah, got
off Mexico, living on plain water and raw fish. My God.
And his dog with him.
Yeah. he must have looked at that dog on a few occasions and thought, hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I didn't read about his boat. I don't know if he left his boat behind or towed it in, or he's starting again, or what he'll do.
I saw a quick grab on the news last night, and he it looked like he'd lost the mask.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Didn't get his boat.
Yeah. So the boat was stable, but it didn't look like there was a mask there. So maybe he'd lost that. I don't know what the circumstances were, but by jingo, he was lucky to be picked up. I mean, sailing on a little boat like that in that ocean.
3 months.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. I couldn't do that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, fishing could be good.
Yeah, well, that's true. I've only my wife and I went on a cruise to New Zealand. I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. We left Melbourne and went round New Zealand and stopped at a couple of places back to Melbourne. I think it was 13 nights or something, and but that was enough for me. Yeah, I'd rather fly now and get where I'm going quickly and start enjoying myself.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's more. I just like living outdoors.
Yeah.
I can't. I don't live in a house. I mean, this. This is perfect. Being on the lake, but it just feels a bit small. I would like to leave the lake and zoom off. But my main thing is fishing. So my main reason for wanting to go doing it is a new species or new species. So I want to go and catch. I want to catch fish on the flats and to learn them, like permit and triggerfish and the bones and all this kind of stuff. And the way to do that is actually to be there. And the way to be there, the cheap way to be there, I think, is to have a boat. It's cheaper way. It's not necessarily very cheap, but it's certainly cheaper than how most people go saltwater fishing.
Yeah,
I don't want to be guided. I mean, that doesn't really appeal to me. I want to go figure the stuff out and take my time doing it.
I've fished in a few places, and I'll often, because I've got a short time, I'll often get a guide and then just, where do you want me? And I'll arrive there and off I go. But it's for a day here or 2 days there. That's all. I remember the first time I went bone fishing off not far from Cape Canaveral. So is that Cape Kennedy now? I think it's called. I think it's in Florida. And I remember seeing it, and I went to a tackle shop. I wanted to go. Never fished for bonefish before, and he said, "Look, get a guide." And he set me up, and I had a day. I spent half a day trying to get used to standing on the boat and casting, but once that happened, the afternoon was terrific to see them in the water and cast them, drag that fly across it, and then see them go bang. That was fun. But that was exciting. For some reason, the history of fly fishing appeals to me, and so when I go to England, I love fishing in the south of England in the chalk streams. That's good. But I also like say fishing, say a river like the Wharfe in Yorkshire and up through Scotland in the Freestone rivers. That's because the history there is just as great as the chalk streams, only you read about the chalk streams more. But I would have loved to have wandered along the banks of the Test and run into blokes like Frank Sawyer for a chat. And Halford before then, if you could time travel, that'd be exciting for me.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of history there.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it goes back a long way. It goes back 400 odd years, or even longer, but 400 years. They were
Yeah.
really kind of where we pitch fly fishing is beginning, but everything was tied to the top of the rod. So they'd 16-foot rods and 16-foot leaders, and that was it. Well, I think it's come on a long way.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
I would like. I wonder how they were. I wonder how they were as casters. I wonder if they were. I wonder if Halford was like a. I wonder if he was getting pointed loops.
I think so. I think with all due respect to them, Halford would have said, "Well, I catch all the fish I need to. I'm fishing my half of the beat." So he'd come back with things like, "Well, I've never caught a trout that knew what sort of loop delivered the fly to me." So yeah, it probably didn't bother him much.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
I remember I ran into a bloke. We were travelling through Scotland, and we were staying near the Spey River, and I ran into there was a fishing shop that I went into, and I was talking to a guide there, and he guided on the Spey, and had a coffee with him, and the next day he brought in an old green heart rod for me to have a look at. A double, what I'd call a salmon double hand. My God, you have to lift it up, and the tip was so heavy it pulled you down, and that wheeled those things around all day. Well, it's our story. You've got to make do with what you've got. So that's what they had.
Yeah,
but in a different world.
Yeah. I have one. My great grandfather, he was a salmon fisherman, out of Glasgow. I never met him, but I inherited that, and I don't know if I would want to give it a cast now. I think it might explode, but it's it's certainly got some history there. That's what I Glasgow. Yeah. My grandfather, he fished, but he didn't really fish. I think he wanted to be a fisherman, but his father obviously was pretty serious. So I got a lot of flies and stuff.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So it's in the genes, mate.
Well, possibly. My father, stepbrother didn't do it. That's probably why I did it, to do something a little bit different. I don't know. It's always been there, isn't it? I remember catching fish with a net, a little hand net, putting in a jam jar, and then taking them back to my grandmother's flat to swim around, and I take it back to the river the next day, and nothing changes. I could still get fun out of doing that.
I used to, when I was a kid, used to fish down in the Yarra River. It's the river that runs through Melbourne, and catch eels. And a lot of fun.
Yeah. You eat them?
Sorry?
You eat them?
Yeah. Well, my father had skinned them.
Yeah.
And before him, my grandfather would skin them, and
did you jelly them?
Sorry? No. Jellied eels is a foreign concept to me. It was just they'd skin them and then boil them.
Okay.
It wasn't.
I've had jellied eels once, and it's not very appealing at all.
No, they didn't do anything for me. But I used to love just being on the river, and the anticipation of catching one. But eating them didn't do anything for me.
Are they still? Do you still have good eel populations?
Oh yeah.
In Europe, they're down to less than 1%.
Sorry.
In Europe, they're down to 1% of what they were 50 years ago.
Oh well, maybe we have a diminishing eel population. I mean, when I was a kid, that was back in the 50s. I mean, any creek around Melbourne have eels in them. I'm not sure, maybe. I done that for decades. Maybe they have diminished too. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I know in New Zealand they have lots, and they're huge there. They're like 40 pounds, some of them. They lived there 100 years before they lived in the rivers for 100 years before they often spawned in New Zealand. But certainly in Europe, they were netting the elvers and shipping them off to Japan, I think, and that's where the population has massively declined.
It is a shame. Unfortunately, all too common in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
I hope we learn quickly from that.
Well, well, I hope so. I tell you, but it's who knows what. I mean, look at the planet. Look at the planet now. We can't even seem to save ourselves. How are we going to save the fish?
Yeah, that's right. So, with your snakehead fishing, like, do you see them now? Do they feed during the day or at night time? Or
They feed at night in the day. I've never caught them at night. I think they sleep, but that's the impression I get. But the reason I catch them, there's two ways to catch them. One is when they come up to breathe. So when the oxygen's low, they'll come up and supplement it by taking a mouthful of air. And so every 5, 6, 7 minutes, when the oxygen's low, it's usually quite warm. So usually the water's over about 32 C. And then we start to see them. So it gets up to about 34. And then they'll come up and they'll take a mouthful of air, and then they'll go back down, sometimes 15, 20 feet. And 5 minutes later, they come back up again, usually in a different place. You see them coming up like a black torpedo. You know, this comes up, not a torpedo, a submarine comes up, takes that mouthful of air, and then turns down slowly if it's not spooked, and that's your shot. So you have, from the moment it takes air to the moment your shot comes in, you have 1, maybe 2 seconds to put the fly 1/2 meter in front and bloop it away. Too much, that does no good. Put it on top of the fish, no good. Too slow, no good. So it has to be a perfect shot. But the other way to catch them is if they have their babies. So male and female will look after the babies, and they'll travel around the lake with them. Usually after the wet season or just at the beginning of the wet season. So there's 2 times of the year. And sometimes in the middle of summer. It can happen all year, but there's a time of the year, and it's usually around November or again in late March, where you can just go around the lake looking for babies. And on a really good day, you might find 10 sets. I haven't found that for a couple of years, but I used to find up to 20, 25 sets in a day. And then once again, you let the adult come up, one of the adults, and you put the shot in. And if you get the shot in the right place and not into the babies, the fish will eat, as long as it's not spooked. But it's really important that it happens first shot. So now it's good. So this is a warm time of the year. It rained all day today, so there won't be snakehead coming up because it will oxygenate the water. But it's been warm, and they're starting to sort of rise without their babies. So that's good. And there's another fish I fish for here, which is giant gourami. And they eat insects like termites, ants. They also eat algae and leaves, but it's a omnivore, sorry. But they'll eat particularly termites. When the termites land on the lake like ants do, there'll be hundreds of thousands of them. And the gourami come up, and they are small, would be 3.5 kilo, but they're usually 4 to 5 kilos. And they're eating dry flies. Oh, it's wonderful fishing, and they fight very hard. But they're just like a trout, but they're smarter. We had one fish look at the fly for 5 minutes. Can you imagine that? It came up and started looking at. I was taking photographs. I had a client, and this fish went around, put it on his nose, came around, had another look, came and looked at the boat, looked at us, went back and looked at the fly. 5 minutes, and more than 5 minutes actually, and it didn't eat. But often, sometimes I look at it for a minute or 2 minutes and eat it. I don't know what's going on with those fish, but there's obviously some. I mean, you wouldn't. I have never had that with any other fish. Trout's like 4 seconds, 5 seconds would be a very long refusal, not 5 minutes. So I've got one here. I've got a little aquarium in the boat, and I've got a little baby, a year old now. He's about this big, but not that fast growing. But he eats cheese. He loves cheese, and I've got a light above the tank which attracts the insects, and so. But he spends all of his time looking out. he's like watching to see what's going on. And he recognizes different people who come to the boat.
Yeah.
Smart fish, very smart fish.
Oh, that's amazing.
Incredible. So there's those two fish. There's also jungle perch, which are a bit like, I don't know. I don't know, but they are they tend to come up on evening and first light in the morning, and they will feed at the surface. Otherwise, they're feeding about 15-20 feet down. It can be, that can be quite good. And then in the rivers, we've got two species of marcia, and that's very much like trout fishing. It's just they're a lot stronger, but they behave exactly the same way. So dries and nymphs and wets will catch these fish.
Yes.
So there's a lot of variety here. But the thing that brought me here was a snakehead, for sure, just because it's so different. You know, it's a new challenge. It was a casting challenge for me.
And were you aware of snakehead before your first visit to Malaysia?
No, I came over to examine. That trip after Australia, I came over here to examine in KL. Hazy had been over and trained them. So there was 12 or 13 guys here from KL, plus some Singaporeans who came up, probably about 20 odd people. And so examined them. And afterwards, they took those who wanted it on a fishing trip. And I came. And then they invited me back 4 months later for a gathering. And there was Tim Kempton came over. That's where I met him. And so there's a few Australians, and there was this gathering, and a few guys from Europe, and I was one of the ones they brought over. And again, they took us fishing on this lake, and I thought, well, this is really interesting. How do I do this on my own?
Is that the lake you're currently on?
Yep. Well, north, yeah, on this lake, but in the northern part.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just do this on my own. So I didn't ask anybody. I just did it because I know, if you ask somebody, they'll just say no. Yeah. So I just went ahead and did it, and it's been fine. And now it's all, we've got all the permissions and everything else. But back then it would definitely have not been, if I'd asked, it'd have been a problem. But it's been good. I mean, I wasn't doing very well, so I got a 12-foot boat, and I said, right, I'm just going to live in that, because I wasn't catching very many fish. And I thought, if I'll get a 12-foot boat, I'll live in the boat for a year, fish it every day, but I'll get to fish all the different seasons and get to explore it. And then I'll make a decision if I actually want to spend more time here. And so obviously it worked out, and that's why I'm still here.
10 years later. So yeah. How far are you from the nearest town where you get your supplies?
About 40 kilometers.
Oh, okay, that's not too bad.
Yeah. So we've got a house in town. We've rent a house here. So I go back usually once a week, and do a shopping and stock up the boat.
Yep.
But that's still pretty remote. So if somebody comes to me, wants to come fishing, the nearest airport is about 2.5 hours from here. And if they go into KL, it's about 4.5, 5 hours. So right. We're mostly but we're just south of Thailand. Thailand's about 20 kilometers that way.
Oh, okay. So how many people live in that town? Is it a big place, or just a
maybe 20,000?
Oh, okay.
30,000. It's got a couple of supermarkets.
Yeah. No, so that's a pretty big job.
Yeah, it's a reasonable, but it is still a country town. Yeah. And that's probably the biggest town in this area by quite a long way. I mean, it's I'm not really a town person. I like being here. Sometimes I can be here, and I'm sure there's nobody within 10 kilometers of me.
Yeah.
I can be quite remote. I mean, sometimes there are the indigenous Malaysians, Yoran Asli, have two tribes here. There's a tribe who live in the south and a tribe who live in the north. And I'll regularly see them camping and netting. And that's one of the issues here, is they have the right to net the lake, but unfortunately there's no restrictions on it. And they're not making much money out of it, but it's their livelihood. And so it has to be replaced with something else, because at some point they won't have a livelihood because there won't be any fish.
Right. And that's the inevitability of that, unfortunately.
It's a problem. People eat fish, so that's difficult.
And it's good. And are you coming to, or can you see yourself going to Sweden next year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have gone this year. It's just so close to COVID. our country our borders didn't open till about 2 months before Sweden, or 3 months before Sweden, by which point, and I got quite a lot of debt from COVID, which we're out of now, but it took quite a bit, and I just couldn't justify it. But absolutely, I'll be in Sweden next year for sure.
Yeah,
I'm around it.
I want to try and go. Whether I get there or not's another thing, but I'd like to go to one more World Championship. That'd be fun, I think.
I really want to go. I want to, my goal is, I haven't won that 5-weight yet, and I really want to win that 5-weight.
Yeah.
That's been my entire reason for going there, and I've been close. I've been in the final 3 times and messed up twice or more, but and I was unlucky. I thought I would have been all right when it was in Estonia. Everybody got wind apart from me. I don't know what the hell happened there, and it just wasn't even. And there's been a lot of unevenness in it, but I'm sure if I get the opportunity, I'm sure that the opportunity is certainly there. And it would be nice to get it. I'm not going to try. I'd like to get quite good at the accuracy as well, but it's not. I think it's a good thing for teaching. It's been the World Championships, all the competition's been really good for my coaching, because I've learned so much out of it from the movement, and it's shaped what I teach. And I mean, I can, before that, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what's a good stroke or what isn't, or for what reason. But certainly know it now, because you study movement and you get to see what works, and then you find ways of teaching that. So it's and that's most of my teaching. Most of my income at this moment is actually coaching via Zoom, like this, but with rods. So I got students all over the world at the moment. So I spend. I've got 25 students at the moment that I'm coaching on 6-month courses. So
that's great.
So that's all really come from competition, in my opinion.
You've broken some ground there with the tenure of your lessons. That's quite innovative. Can I say that?
Yeah, I offered 6 and 12 at first. A lot of people took 12, and the guys on 6, I thought, well, that's such a shame, because often 7, 8, 9 for some reason, that's a big step forward. And a lot of the guys now are rebooking, so they're not just doing 12. In fact, I've got one who's done. He just finished he's done 36 with me over 3 years or something like that. So, and I'm sure he'll rebook again. So it becomes just part of his every month, or every 6 weeks we get together and prepare him for whatever he's working on. He might become a CI next. But it's really well. I wouldn't do individual one-to-one, one lesson now. What's the point? What are you going to do? There is no follow-up. I want to work on somebody for 6 months.
Yes.
And have them.
A wise man once said, Paul, that the definition of business is repeat business. So if you're getting repeat business, then it's excellent.
Yeah.
Well, you think about ever play with a stepping technique. Make a decision as to which foot you want to land on. My advice would be the left foot, not the right.
Yeah.
And even within a platform, you can do so at the start of your stroke, you can a small step with your left, a small step with your right, a longer step with your left, and deliver off that. And you'll start moving that line earlier. So when your body comes into play, the line's already moving. You've pulled out some of that sag, and that's what gets the advantage out of the step. It's that movement of the line and getting it taut.
Yeah,
as distinct from anything else.
Yeah, I will play with that. I will certainly play with coming through over the top.
I see value in that, particularly for tracking. Even if the power application changes, I can see that very much. Because I was noticing I had a tracking issue coming forward just in pantomime. So I do think that will be there. And so I mean I'll get back into it. I don't train my distance apart from just leading up to the competition.
Yeah.
But this time I will pick it up earlier. I train my casting. I just don't train specifically casting every day, right? And I'm teaching every day just about. But I don't specifically work on all out distance, unless it's a competition coming up. But we've sort of got that coming up now, so I'll start to build it in and work out where I'm going to go.
Well, if you can,
I mean, as I say, John, I just felt that we've been so close to what it's like, all those 120s, 120-foot cast, and occasionally you get one longer, but at some point you get to a point where you don't get a cast that goes longer. Everything up to that, all of a sudden there's one freak cast that goes further.
yes.
And it's like all of a sudden that sort of stops happening, and you start to wonder if there is more. And I've started questioning that for the last maybe 10 years or 15 years, because all of a sudden it's not that people are going further, it's just that there's more people going as far, if
Yes.
you like. So it's
I agree with that. I think the benefit to performance that Bert's got, I think, is singularly the step. I don't think he moves his hands faster than anyone else, but the step allows him to move his line faster. And that's, to me, that was the reason it moved another 10 feet. But if we continue with the same basic pattern, you're right, it's hit the wall.
Yeah.
And very close to it. And it is gear dependent. And I don't think, I'd be surprised if under the same movement pattern that we'll get performance increases. I think we've got to change the movement pattern. Now, it might not work.
Yeah.
It would be the biggest furphy since, the rods of spring. It could be, but it may not. And there may be some middle ground somewhere that if we can learn from those other sports.
No, I'll certainly pick it up again. My issue here is really it's difficult to measure distances here because I lose about 10 feet just because of the climate.
Yeah.
And or 8 feet certainly.
Yeah.
So, but I will certainly pick it up and start playing around a bit again.
When you go into town once a week, have you got an opportunity to have even if it's just a 5-minute cast on a field,
Yeah, there is a field.
Yeah.
I go running there, so yeah, I can certainly cast there. I do give sometimes lessons. I like casting off the roof of the boat. That's my favourite place.
Yeah.
But the problem there is it's the roof of the boat, and once again it's a little bit unstable, so I can't step there. But I can cast there every day, so that's the problem. The other option is I get some sort of platform out on the bank and I build something. But first, I'm not too worried about that because I think the key is really to get your carry up. My carry is always pretty good anyway, and then start working on the launch.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I know that if I go in top form, if I train up and go in top form, I've got a very good chance of taking that medal. And it's just about doing that. What is depressing is I've gone there and got good form and had bad conditions a couple of times, and that's a lot of training to do for what it turns out to be a lottery, and that's annoying. I thought next time what we might do is have a sexy loops meet afterwards, just to make some sort of value out of it, and maybe get 20 or 30 or 40 people there that we can be changing ideas and teaching and whatever. Then it makes it worth going. Something else to have your 3 minutes of casting or 4 minutes of casting.
Yeah, that'd be fun. If I get to Sweden and that happens, I'd certainly stay and and watch people cast in that. I think you're good enough. I've watched you cast, and your ability to manage that long line, and I completely agree. If you could add 10 feet to that, you'll cast further. My recommendation to you would be incorporate a step and finish on.
I have been, John. I have been in training. I mean, I take note when I mean I've cast a lot with Burn, but I've taken note of that a lot of those guys are stepping. But you know, as I say, it didn't make sense to have that instability on introduced instability on a shaky platform. Yeah. I knew, and I said and I've been saying for quite a while, that if we were off grass or a solid platform, that's the way it would go.
Yes,
you know, for sure. I'm fully aware of that.
They had in Norway, the platforms were absolutely solid. They were on pontoons, so they moved, but the platform itself was solid. And when I got there the day before the event, we were there late, and I went down for a throw, and I walked out, and I thought, oh, geez, this is terrible. But after 10 minutes, it was fine, and I found they were wide enough to be stable. You know, so I'm not sure what they'll have in Sweden, but I would suspect they'd be quite stable.
Yeah.
You know, even if they're on pontoons, the depth of the platform will be wide enough to be stable. That's how they were in Norway. And when they were talking about in Norway that Sweden were looking at funding a casting pool, a purpose-built pool for the championships. Wow. So I don't know whether that will eventuate, but if it does, then yeah, that'd be good. But
awesome.
You know,
they're very fortunate in Sweden and some of those other Norway that they pay their teams.
They're so lucky. Like this tournament that Chris has organised for the American Championships. You know, Bern will go, and it won't cost him.
Yep.
You know?
Unbelievable. Well, it's great. It's fantastic. That's what it needs.
Yeah.
That's huge difference.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to cost you. It's probably going to cost me, I don't know, more than probably five. I mean, my budget on that has gone up considerably now since moving to Malaysia, and now that the airline flights are higher as well. I mean, I was looking at about probably £5,000 to £7,000 on the last one, and it's probably this one. I imagine it's going to be, especially if I fly my wife over as well and she competes. It's a very expensive trip.
Oh, it is. It's
So I was trying to get a Malaysian team together. Because we could probably get the government money if I could just get a few more people involved. So,
is there any interest at all amongst the locals?
There was pre-COVID. I was going down, but they weren't training very much in between. There was a couple who were sort of into it. If you'd gone back before I came, there was some guys who were doing it, but then they got families and stuff got in the way. It's finding another group of people who are keen, and that's just constantly trying to get. The thing is, I'm going to have to train them, which is fine, but it's a lot of, you know, I don't mind doing it so long as they put the time in as well. Yes. So I've gone around in 4 different places and done some training and the most I got was out of KL, where I was going down there every month, and I'm happy to drive down every month and do that. So I'll try and do that again. Our issue here is it's difficult to have a long day, because if it's a typical day between about 11 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's really hot.
Yes.
Standing out in 30 34 degrees with the sun blazing down, and then you get a storm come through. So you're at the days, it's not like an event in England where I would do it on a weekend and people would arrive on Friday and we'd cast Saturday and Sunday, and then they'd leave and we'd have, I don't know, probably 20 hours of casting.
Yes.
Here it's like 3 hours or something. And if they only do one day, it's anyway, if you get enough people interested in it and they train, then it works.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could. I
talked about doing the like if we could do like Southeast Asian Championships, or even an Asian, or even an Australasian Championships.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that, you know, that we get Australia, Japan would come. There's enough. There's actually quite a few casters in all the different countries, and something like that would probably inspire more casters regionally to take it up.
I'd love to come to an event like that. You might even, you know, like you might even get a couple of the Yanks to come over. I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
probably the Swedish.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's just a matter of fitting it into their schedule.
Yeah,
it's the most difficult decision. Not if I'll go, when.
So I think that could work quite well. But there just needs to be a little nucleus of even if it's just half a dozen keen instructors to make keen casters to make it happen. So that's what I'm trying to sort of create before I leave, and we'll see where it goes. But I think that would be great. I would love to see casting sport in this part of the world take off.
Well, if there's anything I can do, I'd certainly participate in a regional tournament. That'd be fun.
I'm sure Japan could host it too. I mean, they've got the
that's right,
resources and the money.
Well, it's only a 9-hour flight to Japan from Melbourne, so
it's not even that from here. It's about 4 hours, I think.
I'd be in that.
Yeah. And there's an island here, Langkawi. It's quite forward thinking. They put money into hosting events because they want to be kind of like an event place, and so actually getting it sponsored would probably be relatively easy, I think, which would help. That's where the Ironman is. That's where I'm doing the triathlons in Langkawi, and they have other sporting events. So you know, I'm sure whatever the budget is, somebody's going to take half of it in the government, but then what's remaining would be enough to set up the event.
Always the case, mate. Always the case.
Malaysia is.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. That's excellent. All right. Yeah, exactly. No, good. More power to you.
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, it's been fantastic talking to you. I've learned a lot. There's been I've even got a few things to try out there. Very inspiring.
It's so hard to convey some of these things verbally. It's just the tyranny of distance. You know, if you and I lived within a couple of hours of each other, Christ, we could do this once a month and with a rod in our hands.
Well, we can actually, with this communication, we actually can do it, believe it or not. I'm doing it regularly. You just have to put the Zoom on the phone.
Yeah.
Put it on the stand, and we can do that.
Yeah, well, we might have a think about that. That'd be I'll get out in the park, and
that would actually be good to do that. We should do that. When do you do your paper? When do you finish your paper? Have you started it yet? Your thesis?
Yeah, I've started. I finish in February 20. What are we now? 23. I finish in February 26.
Oh wow! Okay,
it's a 4-year. Wow. It's a 4-year program. So I'm progressing through it. There's 3 phases to it. There's identifying what instructors say they focus on. What do they coach? The second phase is one I've just completed, is getting a pilot program. I've got I got 10 casters ranging from, you know, fly fishermen through to, well, I had a world champion caster out here, and I put them in the movement lab, wire them up, and identify their joint patterns, so their joint movements. What do their feet do, their knees, their hips, their shoulders, their elbow, their wrist,
yeah.
and put a sensor on the rod. So I made up a, you know, one of those indoor casting rods you can buy.
Yeah.
So I got one of those, and I made up out of yarn that they use for curtains, opening and closing, and wove those together to make up a shooting head. Took me a while to get it right, and then I've got 0.30 line mono on the end of that, so they can actually cast it indoors. Yeah. And it's amazing just how realistic that outfit is. The head's only about 12 foot long, but the weight is enough to really to feel the line on that rod, on that indoor rod. I've got it's an Epic, I think it's called. Epic. Yeah. Anyway, so what I did, I got them all into the lab, and so I've got all the data from that, which I'm working through at the moment. The next phase is I'll then get javelin throwers in, and they'll go through the casting stroke using their javelin technique. Because what I want to do is compare what do their feet, knees, hips, shoulders, elbow, hand, what do they do that's different from the fly casters, and how does it change the rod? So what's the speed of the rod in the casting stroke? Now, some of the javelin throwers may find the haul a bit challenging. So what I'll do is I'll just get them to straighten the line out behind them and do a throw, a javelin throw. I'm not so interested in the coordination of the hand. I'm more interested in increasing their rod hand speed. So I'll do that, then compare the two. And then the third aspect, which will be next year, I'll get casters outside with their own gear, and we'll wire them up not to measure the movements of their joints, but to measure the sensors you can put on muscles now that will identify when the muscle contracts and expands.
Yeah.
So then I can look at the musculature to the skeleton and see is there any disjoints in that, and if there is a disjoint, can it be smoothed out and performance improved? So that's the guts of the thesis.
And do you have high-level casters?
Yeah, I've had in my pilot program, I've had a world champion, ICSF caster, world champion, an Australian champion, some club champions, and then 1, 2, 3, another club champion. That's four very accomplished tournament casters, and then 6 fly fishermen who cast salt water and lakes. So they're very familiar with double-handed stroke and long stroke. So I'll also look at what's the differential between the good fisherman and the good tournament caster. What are the differences? How do they manifest themselves? Where are the differences? That sort of thing. I'll look at that too. But that'll be after I finish my thesis. So I've got a massive amount of casting data that will keep me occupied for a decade or so to look at different mixes and matches of technique. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, sounds absolutely fascinating. There's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. But because it's a passion of mine, I don't find it onerous.
Yeah.
I quite enjoy going into uni and talking to my supervisors and bouncing ideas off them.
Yeah.
Particularly the biomechanist. So I want to structure it on with the biomechanics. What can we do? The exercise physiology is okay. If we know how to move our body, what should we do to our body to prepare it to capitalize on that movement structure? And then from a motor learning point of view, to say, well, okay, if we know what we've got to do and what we've got to, or how we prepare ourselves to optimize it, what are the things we need to focus on to teach that stroke?
Yeah.
So what are the motor learning foci that we would need? So yeah, that's why the structure of my three supervisors are across those three disciplines, because I want to amalgamate those disciplines down the track into a casting database or casting program as such that answers those questions. What do we do? How do we do it? And how do we teach it? Yeah.
And when's the book coming out?
Oh, no. Trust me, try and put 100,000 plus words together on fly distance casting will see me out as an author completely. I just loved the opportunity to, one, try something different. Does it work? And if it does work, then try and promulgate it and have people adopt it and see where it takes them. That would be the exciting thing. That's what I want to do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh,
We'll
best
see.
of luck. Best of luck. So look at, well, I hope to read the thesis at least.
You will. Oh yeah, definitely. You're on a list of recipients, mate. Trust me. As soon as I get it through my professorial board, you'll be getting a copy.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How many words is that? 10,000?
Sorry?
How many words does that got to be?
100,000.
100,000. Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot of
It's
work.
amazing. My first, when Oren said to me, "Well, look, we're spending all this bloody time talking about casting. Why don't you formalise it and come into the uni and do a PhD?" And I said, "Oh, that's bloody stupid. Who's going to give me a place? A 73-year-old bloody fly caster wants to study fly casting. Who's going to take that on?" And he said, "Yeah, you might be surprised." And anyway, they gave me a berth, and I've loved every minute of it.
Fantastic. It must be incredible.
Yeah.
Must be so educational.
Oh yeah, there's so much to learn. Like and when I think back over my journey, to use that term, and I think, geez, I thought I knew a bit, but I knew bugger all. To put a fine point on it. So we'll see where it takes me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Brilliant.
Yeah, but I know it'll come a time when, if the data proves that it has substance, then it's a matter of who's going to try it. Who's going to say that's the way I want to cast, so I'll change. That's the next. Yeah, I'm sure. I know you will. Yeah, that's why you're on the list, mate. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'm actually going to have a go with some of the stuff you've said today.
Well, what we'll do is we'll set up a session where I'm out in the park.
Yeah. Yeah.
like a tool, and I can actually take you through that outside this lounge chair.
Right, I'll go on the roof, or I'll go to a park as well.
Yeah, and
That Zoom works brilliantly. You just need a tripod for the phone, and some earphones as well, some Bluetooth earphones, so we can talk, or a headset.
but I've got a tripod and I've got a phone that does all those things. I don't know how you do them, but I just say hello and goodbye with my phone. But
Well, those iPhone earpods that you can get.
I
I
see people walking around in.
And they got a speaker on them as well, so you can have a conversation.
Okay.
Or you can get the thing, but it's Bluetooth, so that way you can stand 30 feet away from the camera and still have a conversation like we're doing. So those are the things that I'd love to do that. So
I'll set myself up and we'll get it organised. Yep, that'd be good. All right, my friend. Well, thank you.
Talk to you, John.
Thank you very much. Talk about some of this theory.
Yeah.
We'll take it a step further.
All right, mate. All right. Well, I'll see you on the board.
You will. All right, mate.
All right, man. Take it easy, John. Thank you very much.
Look after yourself.
Have a lovely evening, mate.
Good night. Bye.
Yes.